across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Lots to get through, of course, on the programme, as you will no doubt be aware. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, former Prince Andrew, has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. He's become the first senior member of the royal family in modern history to be arrested today on his 66th birthday. Innocent till proven guilty and all of that. We'll have the lowdown. Also, the battle on the right is on. Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain launched itself as a political party just days ago. But who would get your vote? Restore, Advance or Reform? It's a confusing picture. And Sir Keir Starmer will defy Donald Trump by pressing ahead with the handover of the Chagos Islands. The US president warned the PM that he was making a big but beautiful mistake by entering into this 100-year lease with Mauritius. We'll have more details on that as well. Everything you need to know, we'll bring you all the breaking news, and boy, judging by this morning, there's bound to be a bit more of it coming our way. Everything you need to know, 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. Leave a voice note there as well, and of course, you can message on 87222. Here's a question. Who will win the fight for the right? I'll come to that in a moment. Of course, we will discuss as well Prince Andrew currently in the chiller. I mean, wow, that is a wow moment. You've grown up in palaces and you're currently sitting in a police cell. This is, of course, an investigation. It's connected to misconduct in a public office and nothing else. He's also innocent and he's helping police with their inquiries. Getting him into that police cell, I'm sure, was a huge badge of honour for whoever did it. Getting the horses and the gold carriage was probably a little more tricky, but we'll have full details on that and, of course, anything connected to the story of him getting arrested as it happens. Elsewhere, now I've been away for a few days and I've come back to a political fallout that we couldn't have imagined a couple of years ago. Let's talk our way through this. So it's a story that primarily involves this man.
You know, people think, oh, Farage has done it, we'll just set a party up, it'll be marvellous, we'll sweep the next election. It just isn't as easy as that.
Well, might not be easy, but this man seems to have done it.
I address you as the leader-in-waiting of Advance UK, a new political force on the British political landscape, a new political party.
Yeah, and it ain't just him, so is this man.
And that's why, here on the farm, I am now launching Restore Britain as a national political party.
Yeah. Remember when Reform were just the new kids on the block? And then, as we mentioned, there was a bit of a row. Ben Habib legged it for the hills to start his own party, Advance UK. Meanwhile, there were more scraps over there at Reform HQ than a Jackie Chan movie. And Rupert Lowe also headed out. And of course, he formed his own party. So we've got this now three-pronged attack going on in terms of right or centre-right parties. This all changed less than a week ago when Restore Britain is now an official party. It was formerly a kind of a movement in that respect, and they're all going to be fighting at the next election. Should be said, Mr. Lowe's party did get off to an impressive start. They've got 7 former Reform UK councillors who've joined Rupert's new party. These were councillors either suspended or kicked out of Reform's impressive Kent County Council group. They've now formed their own separate group on the UK's biggest council. So Restore have... got to get all these names right. Restore, I think, have now a total of 11 councillors. I'll come back to that. So in terms of centre-right or even right-wing parties, remember, it used to just be the Tories. And now Reform made it 2. This increased to 3. As I mentioned, Ben Habib began Advance UK, and now Mr. Lowe has made his group official, Restore Britain. So we now have 4. Blimey, we've got 4 parties on all of this. Worth having a look, by the way, at this stage, at the membership numbers. And of course, we know that these numbers can be a little bit flexible, shall we say. So according to the official counter on their website, Nigel Farage's party has 270,000 members. Ben Habib's party, around about 35,000 members, and Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain claims to have 70,000 members. The Conservatives, depending on who you listen to, have somewhere between 120 and 170,000 members. In terms of councillors, now, this is interesting. You've got to remember some of these parties are literally just formed. Reform have 960 councillors throughout the country. Restore have 11. Advance, I didn't know this, have 9 councillors, apparently. The Conservatives have 4,400 councillors. That's around a quarter of all council seats. So it's a mixed old picture. But who will win the fight on the right? There's the question. If you were a centre-right voter, who the hell would you vote for? And on what basis? I mean, the one thing is for sure is that the more this divides up, the more chance there is that Labour could actually get a victory at the next election. 0344 499 1000. And you can sense in the last couple of days the fallout really has begun. There are no friends in all of this. There's no the usual, oh, well, you know, we all want for the greater good of the country. And Reform have been doing a real job on Rupert Lowe. They've steamed in, they've piled in, they're having none of it. They're talking about his plans, particularly for deportations, are unrealistic, and some describing them as brutal and immoral. Others say, no, hang on a second, Rupert Lowe is speaking exactly the language that we thought Nigel Farage was going to be speaking, but he ain't speaking that language. And then you've got Ben Habib, who's somewhere between all of this, making his points known. And just to confuse the picture, the smart money seems to suggest that at some point Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe will link up together as one party, but don't put a bet on it just yet. That's how it's looking out there right now. Everything you need to know on this, and of course your stories are absolutely crucial, and your comments. Who will win the fight on the right? 0344 499 1000. To talk us through the big stories of the day, Peter Barnes, the political strategist, is back with us in the studio. Afternoon to you, Peter.
Afternoon, how's it going?
Oh, it's all good.
It's a busy day.
It is a busy day, yeah. We should start, of course, with that arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, arrested and is now in custody on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. Were his movements still just a convenience?
We're staying at the house of a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay.
It was a convenient place to stay. There it is.
Astounding.
It was just that. It was a convenient place to stay.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this and I was like, well, this is monumental. And then, you know, the King seems to have, to a degree, come out and said, you're on your own, brother. And that's how I've taken to read that statement, because all of this seems to be very clearly in one line that they're going after the misconduct in a public office, and that's rather because I don't think they've really got the evidence to get him on anything else.
Yes.
So they've used this particular bit of legislation because it's common law. It's not a strict statute. It's not like primary legislation. So it's always done mainly by judges' interpretation. So there's a lot of flexibility in it. However, the standard is very, very high to hit. So you've got to not just be a kind of a public official, but you've got to have the trust of the public, which is a very specific thing in law. Yeah. And then, you know, you've got all these other little bits of the kind of the process to go through. But I tell you now, the reason they've taken so long is I think they've had to get the ducks in a row. Because if you go for Prince Andrew and you miss, I think the public would be absolutely enraged. So everyone is saying, like, why is it taking so long? I think they've had to get everything sorted before they've made a move.
Is this a case, though? Because the police have had a lot of criticism over the years for a lot of things around, I suppose, establishment-type areas. They haven't acted fast enough, whether it's on the issue of grooming gangs, whether it's on the issue of areas where high-profile people could have been involved. And they've been accused, you know, fairly relentlessly of not acting fast enough. Some would say this was such lightning speed. And, of course, the police would perhaps say, well, hang on, you know, in order to be able to fulfil an investigation, by definition of the kind of offence that it is alleged to be, you need his phone. You need his computer. So the investigation hasn't really started yet. This is just the start of it, and they might get to the end and go, nothing to see here. Because it could go on for a long time.
Oh, it definitely will do, I think, because, you know, Prince Andrew doesn't go down without a fight. But what I will say, though, is I do think this one is rather unique, is because we've had the Epstein files, we have the emails, they have the physical, data, and, you know, all the evidence and things. So this one's easier to move quicker on because it is a little more kind of straightforward, because you don't have to do the full investigation kind of, you know, all the interviews of witnesses and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
Because this one has literally got emails with his email on it, and, you know, they've got that side of it. So they can move quicker there, but...
What happens to you, though? What happened? I mean, there is this potential of life imprisonment. But then I think littering is still technically life imprisonment.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether anybody ever goes to prison for life for this kind of thing, or what's likely to happen. Does it depend on the level of seriousness of what you might have told somebody?
From what I understand, it does seem to be that way, because, like I said, it's not a kind of tick box statute kind of bit of law, so it's all very up to the judge's interpretation, which is not going to be a good thing when it comes to trying to convince the public that justice has been done, because you know it's going to be, we don't exactly love judges at the moment. But I have to admit, I do think I think he will get some prison time. I genuinely do.
Wow.
I really do, because I think the severity of what we've seen in the Epstein files, particularly just on in relation to his role as the trade special advisor, or whatever the title was, I think it shows a gross misconduct, and it shows a kind of the deliberate pursuit for personal gain, and I think that's the bit that they're going to nail him on. What they've got to make sure is that his role is that of public trust. That's the key bit, and if they miss on that, I think the whole thing will collapse.
Well, right now he's either being interviewed or awaiting in a cell, and I would imagine it doesn't change because you're him. So either way, Thames Valley Police carried out that arrest this morning, and of course Mr Mountbatten Windsor is in full denial of any wrongdoing, and he hasn't been convicted of any crime. And this is only about that particular area
That's really important to
of
stress.
misconduct in a public office.
Yeah,
so
really important.
Let's move to this. This is another battleground, the battle on the right. Who's going to win the fight on the right? So we've now got Restore, Advance and Reform sort of arguing it out with varying degrees, it seems, of support, but all singing from a similar hymn sheet, but there are nuances here.
Yes, so this is one of those things where I get to say, I told you this was going to happen. I have to admit that a little bit of joy is coming out of these stories, but what I will say is, on this particular one, it is about how far you're willing to go. So this is why they all sound very similar. It's because they've all got the same policy. It's how far you're willing to go. So on the issue of deportations, Rupert Lowe has gone to a very far extreme. Nigel Farage has pulled back. The Conservatives are even further back. Advance somewhere in between. So whilst they do all sound the same, what you've got to look at is the specifics of each policy that they're putting forward and how they compare. And I think that's the key difference between it, because the big problem is the right have introduced what I call ideological litmus tests. In other words, you've got to be this type of conservative. You don't believe in this and believe in this. And then the moment you stray out of that, you think you're a traitor, you're not a patriot, you're this, you're that. And that's basically what's happened with Nigel, because he has promised the world, he's had to kind of under-delivered it, if we're being brutally honest, because he's had to bring in the very people that he said were incompetent and ruined the country. So once you've done that, there's a big bit of that base who goes, well, wait a minute, you're no better than the one that you said that you were better than. So I think this is where it's all broken down, is because there was zero expectation management, there was zero narrative control, and they were pouncing on every attack line they could find to take down the Conservatives. The problem now is the Reform are somewhat in the establishment now. They're in Parliament, they are an established political party, they're on track to maybe be the next government. That's changes. They're not the outsider anymore. Restore is an Advancer. They get to then throw it back at Reform, and Reform, I hate to say it, are a little fragile about it.
But of course, and it depends how this divvies up. What's fascinating is that forever, obviously, the Tory party were not just the Tory party, they were the nasty party. They were the evil party. This is how weirdo lefties described arguably one of the most moderate centre-right parties on the planet, the Conservatives, but that suited them politically. Then that changed, of course, and Reform became, no, it's Reform. They're the real right-wingers, hard right. And the Conservatives look like the Liberal Democrats to some people. Now that's changed again, because you've got Nigel Farage condemning Rupert Lowe's policy on deportations, which many reform supporters thought they were going to get that from Nigel Farage, and they won't, and I've said this forever, there won't be any mass deportations if Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister. That just ain't going to happen.
Yeah, I have to admit, it's quite entertaining to watch Nigel throw the very attack lines that he was thrown at him when he was at UKIP.
Yes.
You know, this is exactly what it is. The kind of, this has all come full circle. It's very entertaining. But it is a major problem because when we look down at it electorally and the maths of this all, there is a real, you know, threat that faces reform, and I don't think they're really confronting it with the seriousness that they should do. Because, you know, these other parties don't have to take seats. They have to take votes. And votes where most constituencies are about 2% of a majority, you know, it doesn't take much to kind of flip them. And unfortunately, I think if they Restore and Advance do combine together, and they really have to. You know, those two men have to get in a room and agree on something, which is very difficult for the right to do. But if that happens, Reform have to actually start to work to earn votes. Because at the moment, they've been able to kind of be on a bit of cruise control because there's been no alternative. Now there is a very credible alternative that the Reform base isn't as opposed to as they are the Conservatives. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Reform handle this, because I've said for a very long time that Reform's inability to control the base was always going to be their downfall. And yet again, I was rather proven right.
Does it, in any respect, and I mentioned it at the top, could this improve Labour's chances of coming back in 2029?
To be honest, Labour's big problem isn't Reform, it's the Green Party. So I always say that the Labour Party will be taken out by a southpaw, not a right hook. Yep. So basically, the Labour Party are losing the majority of their support, not to Reform, but they're losing it to the Green Party because they're seen as more progressive, they're seen as more willing to take on the kind of the social change, the social dynamics and all this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, what it actually means is that we're going to have so many different factionalizations. The way I've described it is the two-party system didn't collapse, it shattered. And there's like bits of glass everywhere, and the public is just going to cut itself out left, right, and centre because we're all trying to, vie for the same voters who basically just want competency, coherence, and clarity. Yeah. That's all voters want. The reason that the Tories and the Labour Party seem very similar is because the public became very similar. The great ideological battles are over. The one thing that people haven't learned from 2024 was that the Conservatives didn't lose because they weren't right-wing enough. They lost because they didn't do anything, and when they did try to do something, they made it worse. Yeah. That is why they lost. And, you know, I think this is where Restore and Advance will have a bit of an edge, is because they're very policy-focused, as Farage seems to be very happy throwing, you know, all these defection parties.
Well, we will see, and we're putting this question out to you this afternoon. Who will win the fight on the right? And if you were a voter that is clearly gravitates towards the centre-right, which of those, when you look at Advance, Restore or Reform, which of those ticks the right box for you? Were you previously one of them and hopped over to the other? And how do you gauge the differences between those three? I mean, there's an obvious one about immigration that seems to divide up. Would that be Ben Habib, Rupert Lowe or Nigel Farage? There's three fairly big figures there in terms of their presence on the media scene, if you like. Which one of those do you imagine will land your vote come an election? 0344 499 1000. We'll be back with Peter Barnes as well, with more as well on the big stories of the day. 1:20. This is Talk.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Julian.
joining
Nice
us.
to be back with you again.
Well, I mean, again, extraordinary circumstances. It's the former prince's 66th birthday. He's lost his HRH, he's lost his prince, he's lost his dukedom, lost all his titles, lost his big fancy house in Royal Lodge in Windsor, banished to the Sandringham estate. What was your first reaction when you heard that he had actually been arrested?
Well, at long last, is my reaction. I've been calling out for this, frankly, for nearly 6 years, ever since the allegation emerged.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Don in Chelmsford says, Ian, if we end up with lots of political parties in the UK, we'll end up like those European countries where we have frequent elections. I mean, you do see that every now and again, where if you ever watch a returning officer in some of those elections in different parts of the world, I mean, the returning officers on stage for about 48 minutes just running through the flipping parties. We could be in that kind of place. Your calls on that, who will win the fight on the right? Lines are open. You can message 87222 or you can drop us a voice note on 0344 499 1000. Peter Barnes is with us as well. Lots to talk about here. Of course, the big stories of the day, including Donald Trump, who's demanded Keir Starmer does not give away Diego Garcia in a fresh attack on his Chagos Islands deal. Yesterday, Talk revealed, of course, how British Chagosians were being served removal orders from the islands. Let's have a reminder.
We're just being served this piece of paper to leave the island, to leave my homeland from the British patrol, from the British Indian Ocean Territory Patrol. They just served me this, which is absolutely a disgrace.
So these are Chagosians, for those who didn't see it, that essentially decided to pitch up on a boat, much like a channel crossing, and say, well, this is my country, I have a right to be here, and then they were told, no, you're deported, which is a little bit extraordinary.
Just a tad.
Just a little bit extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what is going on here? I mean, I think Donald Trump doesn't escape a bit of criticism on this, given that he said it's a great deal and essentially signed it off way back now, then said it was a terrible deal, then said it was a good deal, and now says it's a terrible deal.
Yeah, because you have to go back. I think it was the third comment of Trump where he basically said whatever happens here is completely irrelevant, because he said if the base is not secure, the Americans are just going to take control of it militarily. Yes. Or I think he said by force, whether they like it or not. Yeah. You know, he said it in a little bit more colourful language, and that's the bit that matters, because basically what's happened to the Chagosians is appalling. However, this is about Diego Garcia. This is about strategic geopolitical security. It's about our national security. It plays a vital role in not just launching operations, but in terms of its military, in terms of intelligence collection, because it's a perfect point into the Indo-Pacific and back into the Middle East. It is the perfect point. It's also miles away from any other kind of landmass, so its security is pretty much guaranteed. And then we've got the surrounding security of the base itself. You know, it's designed for one purpose, and the point of why Trump is very angry about it is because it's about permissions. And when in geopolitics, what we mean is that is, can you operate at speed unimpeded when you need to? And then, so it's basically who can stop you and how can they stop you? And you need to make sure that for a place like Diego Garcia, that is the pristine amount of precision. That you can just walk in there and do what they need to do. Unfortunately, now we've added in this extra kind of layer of kind of bureaucracy, this extra layer of liability. This is why the Americans aren't very happy about it, and that's why they said that they will just take control of it if it gets into that situation because of its importance. One of the reasons I think Trump was kind of fine with the deal at first was because there is another island that they could set up another base. However, it's kind of more difficult. It would be a lot more expensive, so it's easier now just to kind of keep Diego Garcia. But I have to admit, it's appalling what's happened to the people who live there. But in the grand scheme of things, the geopolitics of the security of the West, I think, has to come a little bit higher, if I'm being honest.
What is the... nobody can ever seem to really answer this question, Peter. Maybe you can. Keir Starmer's a curious character, and he's he leads the Labour Party. You've got to be a bit curious to do that job. Now, I don't, even by his woeful standards, I don't believe Keir Starmer just woke up one morning and tapped Lord Hermer on the shoulder, not that they sleep in the same bed, but you take the point, politically they do, and said, hey, let's give the Chagos Islands away. I mean, this plan was clearly around, and under the previous administration, it had been explored. They must have their own logic. Even if that logic is flawed, they must have a logic behind this.
Yes, it's because of the cost of the legal cases that Mauritius was continually bringing against the UK. It was ratcheting up and up and up. And it was getting to the point, actually, where this non-binding decision could have started to have a real-world impact. This is one of the reasons the Conservatives opened the door to this, was actually to try and cut that off. It was actually this is all about money at the end of the day from the British perspective. Now, there is a big problem when it comes to people like Jonathan Powell and Lord Hermer, when they basically somewhat of the sirens continually bringing Keir Starmer back to the cause, because there was a report that it was even in Mandelson's emails that he wobbled Starmer on this, that he actually thought maybe this isn't a good idea. And I know that the political director at Number 10 went apoplectic over this. He's saying, are you people stupid? How is this a part of the national security? And I have to admit, I think he has a point. But I do think we have to start looking into Mr. Powell and Mr. Lord Hermer and their connections, because they've got Chinese fingerprints all over this. Because you have to remember that China and Mauritius, they have a free trade agreement, and they have been funneling money into it. China's been funneling money into Mauritius with lots of deals and little backroom agreements for a very long time. This is not a new thing, but it's basically because the Labour Party wanted to do the colonial tidy up and, you know, make sure this this legal case doesn't get out of control any further than it already is. They thought that this is the best way to do it. It isn't the best way to do it, and unfortunately the Chagosians and we in the United Kingdom are not safe and yet again out of pocket.
Let me just bring you this. Dan says on Twitter, he says he switched off, but I think he might still be listening. He says, you're talking about the so-called split on the right, and you have Peter Barnes on, who's a Loopy Low fanboy. Now,
I'm not a Rupert Lowe fanboy.
Now, that would be interesting to call you that, given your own allegiances.
Yes, but to be honest, I'm somewhat of a free agent. I'm more of a plague upon all your houses. My thing with Rupert Lowe is that he's the one that actually deals with the structural issues. He's also the one that does something. I look at the grooming gangs inquiry that he actually did himself, was because nobody else was doing anything. You know, let's not forget that Nigel was 1 foot in, 1 foot out on pretty much every issue. I mean, he's flip-flopped more times than you see on Benidorm. It's ridiculous when it comes to consistency. Rupert Lowe has had a consistent opinion and actually done something. So it's not about being a fanboy, it's about actually criticising your own side by holding them accountable by the words that they come out with. This is my one thing I've never understood about Reform, is that they let their own side off with the very hypocrisies that they attack the other side for. And this is all coming round and it's coming back at them, and because they don't have a solid ideological core behind them, they're really struggling to kind of attack Rupert Lowe beyond the kind of name calling, which I think is very childish.
Yeah. The problem when you get a message like that is that if you'd have sat there and said, I think Farage is great, then Dan would not have messaged me to say, well, that's a biased opinion.
Oh, yeah, this is the big problem. Is everybody,
whoever is your favourite is the one you want to stand for, and anything else is biased.
Yeah, but this is what I mean by...
You're talking objectively.
Yeah, but this is what I mean when I said that this is the narratives that Reform have used, is that if you're not this, then you're that.
Yeah.
It's not about that. We live... the right is a spectrum. The right, you know, every political party has its different kind of wings. The reality is that the Conservatives were very good at being the broad church to keep all of this together, because they had the institutional reach and control. Yeah. Now that they've fractured and they've shattered everywhere, unfortunately, you've got lots of different people vying for the same thing. And people, I understand the pragmatism behind getting behind Reform, but I don't think replacing one bad government with a government we don't know potentially anything what they're going to do is a particularly good idea. So when I say I want Reform to do something, it's actually because I think it would be good for the country if they tell us what they're going to do, beyond saying how many defections they've got, because that's great, but it's the governing bit they've got to move to.
And this from Angela, who says, I'm sticking with Reform. All these others are attracting far-right and some quite nasty characters. And it's interesting that tag that Reform have been trying to, and I think with some success, get rid of, because naturally the left will always identify anyone who's, you know, slightly to the right of Jeremy Corbyn as some kind of neo-Nazi, fascist, racist, Eugene Terre Blanche supporting dodgebot. That's how it seems to work.
Yeah.
Try putting that on a name tag.
I was going to say,
but now, of course, that tag is being used to other parties and not so much Reform.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this kind of plays out. But I do think it's because of the way that we've made everything a dichotomy. It's got to be this or that. Unfortunately, you can agree with people and still not like them. And I do find it interesting that yet again, I do think it is kind of Tory Party 2.0, that they're using the exact same attack lines they used to complain about. And that is hypocrisy. And unfortunately, the British public punish that very clearly.
There it is. I think Prince Andrew will resign by 4 o'clock this afternoon, by the way, just throwing that out there. 0344 499 1000. Peter, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Barnes with us on the programme. Over to you. We're going to get a voice from Reform, from Advance and from Restore in the next section. 3 of them. See what they have to say and what they say about each other as well. Who will win the fight on the right? It's 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. 0344 499 1000. There is an awful lot to get through here this afternoon. Any breaking news on the Andrew Mountbatten Windsor story, we will bring that to you. One would assume at some point in the day he will be released from custody as he's being interviewed at the moment over there by Thames Valley Police. Full details on that. Many of you are making the point, will Peter Mandelson get arrested, and why hasn't he been arrested? Well, he's done nothing wrong, we should say, although there are allegations and rumour and innuendo around this same issue. All of that, and you'll miss nothing right here on Talk. Now, as Rupert Lowe has recently announced that Restore Britain will be a political party, the battle is between the right wing, with Reform UK, Advance UK and Restore Britain all fighting for their spots in Parliament, who will come out on top at the next election. Then, of course, there's local elections to come in about 11 weeks' time. I mean, it's literally round the corner. It sounds crazy. So let's get a voice on each of those parties. Firstly, we speak with Myron Senthil Nathan, who is a former Reform UK candidate. Myron, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us, and still a Reform member, as I understand it. So listen, I mean, we've now got a definitive, unarguable group of parties, all pitting themselves in a similar place. How does Reform distinguish itself from Advance UK and in particular from Restore Britain?
Well, I think there was an interview which I already commented about where Charlie Downs was speaking to Alex Phillips, and he kind of said himself the clear difference is they understand who the British people are. And he defined the British people as those who have ancestry to these islands, i.e. probably someone not like me. And he sort of described a spectrum of Britishness. And I think the questions I have for Restore are threefold. Firstly, I've heard him say things like, if you want to hold a high office under Restore, perhaps a Home Secretary or something like that, you can't be a second generation. You have to be something much more than that. You're maybe your third, fourth generation. So I want them to clarify that. So someone like me, because I've been asked to join Restore and actually as a parliamentary candidate by one of their members, but I don't think they would actually accept me as a parliamentary candidate, certainly not someone who would hold a cabinet office. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this: if they define the British people as those who are ethnically indigenous to these lands, what are the policies that they're going to implement that would prioritise the ethnically British individuals over someone like me who's not ethnically British, but I look at British as a civic identity, forged in 1707, exported out into empires and made the individuals subjects of the crown. But that's a different story. What are the policies that they would implement? And the final question is, look, on X, there are a whole army of people, some of them very well-known X accounts, anonymous, obviously, who champion remigration. That means remigration of people like me and my family. Even though I'm born here, high ratepayer tax, Hindu but champions Christianity, and I've always spoken against mass migration. Those accounts, Rupert Lowe himself, who I do respect, he interacts with those accounts. You've got people at the high end of Restore who interact with those accounts and sometimes even endorse those accounts, and they have very, very dark views. Where is the backstop of Restore? Have they closed the back door to these dark issues, these dark ideas? Because I don't see them vocally coming out and condemning them. I think what they look at is they see themselves as a broad church, which includes some of these dark forces, and that's why I think Restore need to really be careful about how they're operating, because there are some of their members who are not quite aware of the people who support them.
Well, we're going to speak to Charlie Downs in just a moment, so we can put some of that to him. Just a final point, Myron, then. Other than deportations, is that the only difference then between your party, Reform UK, and Restore Britain or Advance UK?
I'm struggling to actually see the fundamental difference. I think there obviously is a lack of trust with Nigel Farage, and they probably don't like the idea of the number of Tories who've come into the party. So there's a kind of lack of trust on the brand of the party. And then they probably go further when it comes to Rupert Lowe talking about those who knew about the Pakistani grooming gangs should be deported. Reform haven't come out and said that. And then the kind of banning of halal meat. That's another thing. Other than that, I'm struggling to see where exactly is the major differences apart from what I've already just outlined.
OK. Myron, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Myron Senthil-Nathan, former Reform UK candidate, still a member of Reform UK. Well, let's speak to Charlie Downs, who was mentioned a few times in that chat with Myron, campaign director at Restore Britain. Afternoon to you, Charlie. Is Myron on your hit list to deport, I'm bound to ask, on the basis of what he just said? Good afternoon, Charlie.
Good afternoon, Ian. It's very good to be with you, as always. Look, I mean, the arguments that Myron just made about my party, I think, speak to the way that Reform are thinking. It was nothing but guilt by association, allegations that we hold positions that we, in fact, don't hold. Like, for example, saying that we would deport him and his family, which is absolutely not our policy. If you read our policy, we are very, very clear about what our position is on immigration. Yes, we want to deport all illegal migrants, those who have come here illegally and those who are living here illegally, of whom there are about 2 million. That's absolutely our position, and that is the stated position of the majority of British people as well. And when it comes to legal immigration, we are absolutely in favour of encouraging those who are foreign nationals, who are in our country, living on benefits, living in social housing, committing crimes, who can't speak English, and who are a net burden on the taxpayer, to leave. This is absolutely our position. So, as Myron just said, he doesn't fall into that category. So I think that answers that question. Now, if Reform are not prepared to have a difficult conversation about the way in which mass immigration has been imposed upon the British people without their democratic consent, and the fact that, in our view, the moral response to that is to not just stop it, not just have net zero immigration, which is what Reform's policy is, but actually to put measures in place to reverse mass immigration, then that's up to them. But I think the British people are ready for that conversation.
What about this allegation that was just made by Myron there as well, and a few others have made this point, that you are dancing with some pretty iffy characters as well, the kind of Britain First brigade, those who are in a far more extreme, not necessarily illegal, but a very extreme area of the right-wing spectrum, that those voices are being entertained, or at least they're not being dissuaded. And in fact, I think he said that Rupert even engages with some of those voices too.
Like whom?
Well, he made the point.
Well, no, but I'm asking you, like, if you would care to name a specific individual, then I can talk about it. But if we're just going to have a vague conversation about anonymous accounts on Twitter...
No, I would agree with you. That was the allegation he made, and said that, you know, Charlie's party is doing this kind of thing. Is that's something you don't recognise as an issue that is affecting Restore?
Well, look, if we're discussing just anonymous accounts on the internet, I'm just simply not interested in that line of argument. If we're talking about specific individuals or organisations, then what I would say is if the person or organisation in question is not doing anything illegal and is not an elected representative of the public, then what we're talking about is just a British citizen. And I would encourage Mayrin to talk to that person directly, or indeed, Ian, for you to have that person on your show if you want to talk about their views. Because what I'm here to do is to talk about Restore Britain's views. And we're not in the business of disavowing random members of the public for the temerity of supporting our party.
But of course we do have Mr Farage as well, who's happy to kind of make that point. We had a message from Angela a little earlier, who suggested that attracting far-right, some quite nasty characters, is that you don't recognise that way of defining what you guys are about. And I'm merely just putting that to you, Charlie.
Well, Ian, as you know, we now have 70,000 members nationwide, which in just less than a week is an unprecedented achievement in British politics. And if you look at the polling around the policies that we are offering the British people, these are widely supported, very mainstream, very popular positions outside of the M25, outside of the Westminster bubble. Things like reintroducing the death penalty, reversing mass immigration, deporting all illegal migrants, and all the rest of it. These are very, very normal, very popular positions. So yes, there may be some figures who hold some, you know, some controversial views who support our party, but there's also a great many more very ordinary people, many of whom didn't vote at the last election, by the way, who support our positions. And so all I would say here is that the real political dichotomy in 2026 in Britain is not left versus right, it is establishment versus anti-establishment. Okay. And Reform UK, over the last 48 hours particularly, with Layla Cunningham, their Mayor of London candidate, calling me personally and our party a neo-Nazi organisation, and Mayrin just then trying to engage in some kind of guilt by association tactic, they have revealed themselves to be part of the Westminster liberal establishment, because they clearly can't win the argument on the grounds of principle and fact, and so they have resorted to these low left-wing smear tactics. And to that, I would say, I would encourage the British public, and particularly Reform UK members watching this show right now, to ask themselves whether they want people who would be prepared to engage in such low tactics running our country.
Okay, and similar question as I put to our last guest, Charlie. Much of this seems to revolve around almost exclusively the issue of immigration and deportation. Other than that, and of course it is very central, naturally and understandably, to any centre-right party, we all understand that. But beyond that, what are the salient differences between Restore Britain and Reform UK or Advance UK?
Well, I think I've mentioned one already, Ian, which is that we are the only party to forthrightly back the reintroduction of the death penalty for the most serious crimes, which again is a position that is widely supported by the majority of people in this country. When it was abolished in the 1960s, it was never put to the public. And it was never in the manifesto of the government that abolished it. And so this is something that's been taken away from the British people without their democratic consent, in the same way that mass immigration has been imposed upon us without our democratic consent. So on law and order and on justice, I would say that we are markedly different to Reform UK, because we're prepared to do the things that we feel, and which the majority of the British public feel, are just for child murderers, for rapists, for paedophiles, for simply the most disgusting people in our society, whom historically we would have quite gladly delivered capital punishment to, and which any self-respecting society does, in our view.
Charlie, great to have you on as ever. Very thorough stuff from Charlie Downs, campaign director with Restore Britain. Let's speak with Paul Thorpe, who's a college member with Advance UK. Nice to have you with us, Paul. I mean, you've heard from Reform UK there and also Restore Britain. Where does Advance UK, sort of in a nutshell, as it were, where do you sit in this wider picture of this fallout or this battle for the right?
Well, I think the frustrating thing from my point of view sitting here today and listening to Charlie is very similar to where Charlie and Restore sit. I think there's a very little difference between the two parties. In fact, Advance was initially set up by our leader, Ben Habib, with Rupert Lowe in mind as its leader. And if I'm honest, I don't speak for the party now. I can speak for me personally when I say I'm still a little bit disappointed that Rupert didn't reach out to Ben and manage to come together. So, look, essentially, I think the difference between the two parties is very small, very slim. And I think and I hope down the line there will be some kind of amalgamation, because what we are certainly different from is Reform, you know, the party that promised everything and quite frankly is delivering nothing to solve the problems that this country quite clearly faces.
In fairness, they're not in power yet.
No, but it's looking very likely that they stand a good chance they will be, and that is, what are we going to be left with? This, Ian, this is our last chance. There is no other chance. This is our last chance.
So, Advance UK need to merge with Restore Britain. Is that broadly the message, Paul?
That's my personal belief. I mean, look, I think it's very clear now to the people of the UK that we need a Churchillian-style leader. We're very blessed right now. We have two in Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe, and I think they're stronger together. I think party members from both parties will probably agree with me on that point, and together they can kickstart the long overdue process of genuinely unifying the right so that we can give the country a credible solution.
And of course that was the badge that Nigel Farage has been wearing for probably decades, not years.
Well, he's been wearing it, Ian, but sadly, since he's been taking on outcasts from any party that you wish to mention, he's really gone back on most of that, hasn't he? I mean, Nigel Farage is the man that had it all and blew it. And he's blown it spectacularly. I mean, Richard Tice probably started the process when he described, half of working class Britain as that lot. That is not going to win votes in. They need that lot. We all need that lot, because that lot are the backbone of this country, the white working class that have fought and died and built this country over centuries. You cannot describe the working class as that lot.
I don't recall Mr. Tice doing that, but maybe there is a comment somewhere where he might have alluded to that. All I know is that if a Reform member was sitting here now, they'd say, we are the party of the working classes. We are the party of the average hard-working man or woman.
Well, the thing is, the problem for me with Reform is that, look, they don't have a college for a start like Advance UK has. And at this particular moment, neither does Restore. We have a very unique party being built right in front of everyone's eyes. It's probably the most democratic, in many instances, the most unique British political party that's ever been built, and it's being built right from the grassroots with magnificent foundations. Nigel had it all. He could have had this for himself, but he wants to be the main man and the only man.
On that point, Paul, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Paul Thorpe is from Advance UK. He's a college member with that political party. You did hear three voices there, from Charlie Downs from Restore Britain and, of course, Marion Senthil-Nathan from Reform UK. And it begs the question, who will win the battle or the fight on the right? It's just interesting how you wouldn't have imagined anybody could have nicked any of that territory from Nigel Farage. You'd have assumed there was nothing to nick, frankly. But Restore and Advance believe that they can do what, I think I'm not paraphrasing too much here, they would claim they're the proper right, whereas I think their central allegation is that Reform are the kind of synthetic right and actually will be part of the establishment because they won't do what many people want them to do. I'm pretty sure Richard Tice would never have referred to working class people as that lot, by the way. He is arguably one of the most polite and decent men I have ever encountered, and I would assume there was a sort of an out of context reference from Paul there. But listen, correct me if I'm wrong. We'll open up the lines on this. Who will win the fight on the right? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Julia.
joining
Nice
us.
to be back with you again.
Well, I mean, again, extraordinary circumstances. It's the former prince's 66th birthday. He's lost his HRH, he's lost his prince, he's lost his dukedom, lost all his titles, lost his big fancy house in Royal Lodge in Windsor, banished to the Sandringham estate. What was your first reaction when you heard that he had actually been arrested?
Well, at long last, is my reaction. I've been calling out for this, frankly, for nearly 6 years, ever since the allegation emerged.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
We will talk to Michael Cole as well, the legendary royal commentator, in a moment on Prince Andrew. First, some comment from you. Ian in Bloxwich says, Charlie Downs talking about the death penalty for child murderers. What about cases like Lucy Letby, whose conviction is looking more and more dodgy, says Ian. She would have been executed by now. Well, I think that process, much like the States, is that from conviction of somebody who's committed an offence that would take the death penalty, you're looking at sort of at least a decade before anybody ends up in a chair, as it were. Pumpkin says, Ian, how can reform change things when they're not in power? That bloke's talking out of his area, mate. Well, I suppose you could argue they're in power in, I mean, they run Kent County Council, they run half a dozen county councils. Kent's a particularly big one. 7 of their members are now Restore UK members. They've switched, but they were ones that were essentially either suspended or kicked out by Reform. I think Reform's view on that is that you're welcome to them. I'm merely quoting what has been said. Callum in Edinburgh says, I was Reform, now I would vote Restore, because they would deport lots of people and would ban halal and kosher as well. They've been quite consistent on that specific point. It does seem the deportation argument is central to all of this, and of course there was it about a year ago that Nigel, I think when Rupert, the whole kind of Reform and Rupert Lowe row first began, probably more than a year ago now, soon after the last election, when there was the big fallout, that Nigel Farage openly said, you know, it is, Rupert Lowe's talking about deporting millions of people, it is literally impossible, or words to that effect. This one in from Paul. I hope Lowe and Habib don't screw up the future for the decent British folk with their vanity projects. I'm pretty sure they are, you know, at some point they are going to kind of merge it up, aren't they? Simon in Durham says, on the right, don't forget the Heritage Party and UKIP. You make a really good point, by the way, absolutely bang on. We're talking about the sort of the ones that are more famous. And interesting, it was only UKIP at one point, but UKIP are there, as are the Heritage Party, and they will be fielding candidates in local and general elections to come. And this one from, I think I read Don's out, didn't I? a second ago. And this one comes in from Fox's fan, anti-woke lefties. That's Simon to you and me, who says, Ian, Rupert has never said deport everyone. He actually said, if you can't or refuse to speak English and integrate, then you will be deported. Rightly so. Get rid of them all, says Simon. Yeah, I mean, you have to... What we've got to do is completely recalibrate what some people describe as either controversial. So the word deportation, I saw a left-wing commentator absolutely losing his mind on this. They're talking about deporting people. It's not a pejorative. It's not an extreme position to deport someone. If we lived in a different world and, you know, planet Earth after the Great Bang was a very different place and people just mooched around wherever they liked, then deportation might be a controversial issue. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where there are borders and there are, or there should be, and paperwork and bureaucracy that needs to be adhered to. And if somebody isn't fulfilling all of that, or for other reasons, then deportation is not a bad word. Thank you, Simon, for that. Let's go back to Prince Andrew. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor arrested in custody, of course, as we speak, on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. Michael Cole, the royal commentator, joins us. Michael, good afternoon to you. This is hugely significant. It was a shocking, I think, for most of us, even those of us that follow this stuff, thinking, wow, a member of the, or former member of the royal family, but we take the point, is now sitting in a police cell, courtesy of Thames Valley Police.
Ian, I speak to you and all your viewers and listeners on an extraordinary day in the history and the destiny of the monarchy and indeed of this country. Unprecedented, it is extraordinary, one might even venture the word unique. And of course, all on Prince Andrew's birthday, as he then was Prince Andrew, born there, second son of the late Queen, in 1960. I remember it well. It was a year of royal babies, and he was the first of them. Really remarkable. Arrested this morning, 8 o'clock, 8 police officers, but support for constabulary, went to, it was one of the big residences on the Sandringham estate, where indeed the late Duke of Edinburgh lived shortly before he died, a historic part of the estate. And then he's gone, of course we don't know yet, but to a police station, and I imagine he's going to be, at this moment, probably being interviewed under caution.
Just tell us, Michael, your phone line is being a little bit tricky, but I think we've still... No, that's okay, we've still got you. Just explain, you know a bit more about this man than most. How would somebody like the former Prince Andrew be feeling right now?
Well, I think it must be an extremely unpleasant experience for anybody, but particularly somebody in his position or his former rank. Of course, in recent years, he's been criticised for being arrogant and dismissive of people. He's certainly changed over the years. Ian, I met him 40 years ago, just short, on the day that he became engaged to the then Miss Sarah Ferguson. And he was very ebullient, he was very friendly. You have to remember that he'd returned quite recently from the Falklands War, where he'd been regarded as having done his duty. He was a very popular member of the royal family, and indeed at the time of the engagement and indeed the wedding in 1986, the Duke of York, as he became on the morning of his wedding, and the newly married Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, were extraordinarily popular at that time. It as a breath of fresh air, and I went on tours around the world, Canada I remember particularly, and they were very highly regarded. They of course were together for 10 years, their marriage lasted for 10 years, but it's been a rather extraordinary or unusual divorce in the sense that they've come back together and lived together and were living at the Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park before he had to surrender his 75-year lease. and moved to the Sandringham estate. Why did he do that? Because the Sandringham estate, like Balmoral, is personally owned by the or the monarch of the day, and it was not public property. And of course, the Royal Lodge was part of the Crown Estates and ultimately owned by the people.
OK, well, on that point, Michael, I have to step in, but listen, thank you very much for your time. Michael Cole, the Royal Commentator. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Naturally, of course, full updates on what happened this morning as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in a public hospital. This is
it was a convenient place to stay.
Former Duke of York now sitting in a police cell or an interview room. The first senior member of the royal family in modern history to be arrested, and on his 66th birthday. More on that as it happens. Also this afternoon, the battle on the right is on as Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain launched itself as a political party in the last few days, of course. But who would get your vote? Would it be Restore? Would it be Advance? Or would it still be Reform? We're taking your calls and comments. And Sir Keir Starmer will defy Donald Trump by pressing ahead with the handover of the Chagos Islands. The US president has warned the Prime Minister that he was making a big mistake by entering into this 100-year lease with Mauritius. More stories to come on that in just a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000. Kaz says, resignation watch. There is a lot of ego and fluster going on with these smaller parties, and it's going to push the voters back or not to vote at all. That's a really good point, isn't it? Because if I think one of the senses, or one of the areas that Reform felt that they had not just gained territory, but had owned the entirety of that plot, was almost the kind of common sense, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, this is their position. Common sense on immigration, common sense on gender, common sense on everything. And we are the only people that can do it because the Tories gave it a go and they were rubbish. In fact, they didn't really give it a go. And then they get out common sensed, would be some people's views, by Rupert Lowe or Ben Habib, which could it could very realistically throw people into that kind of, hang on a second. You know that phrase, these guys are all the same? And that's the big danger. This one in from Maggie in London. These are qualities definitely needed to be the next Prime Minister. Business experience, farming experience, anti-grooming gangs, integrity, anti-illegal immigration. Statesman-like. There is only one person who has demonstrated all of the above. And that's Rupert Lowe, says Maggie in London. Thank you for that. We'll do more calls and comments along the way. 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note there as well. Now, as I mentioned, Donald Trump has now demanded Sir Keir Starmer does not give away Diego Garcia in a fresh attack on his Chagos Islands deal. Yesterday, Talk revealed how British Chagosians were being served removal orders from the islands. Unbelievable story, this. Let's have a reminder.
We're just being served this piece of paper to leave the island, to leave my homeland from the British patrol, from the British Indian Ocean Territory Patrol. They just serve me this, which is absolutely a disgrace.
Well, that was very powerful stuff. Let's speak with Tessa Clark, editor of the Chagos Files. Tessa, we've spoken before, of course. This is another, the ups and downs of this story. Let's just first pick up on Donald Trump, because I think understandably, it doesn't seem to do anything for the clarity of this story when the American president said initially that this was a good deal and almost endorsed it. In fact, I think the White House, in their official statement, was something on the lines of, this is a great deal. Then, of course, Mr. Trump came out and said, this is a terrible deal. And then he said, oh, no, actually, it's quite all right now. And now he says it's a terrible deal again. What's going on over there at the Oval Office?
Well, I think from all the reports from people who have met various people in Washington, from the White House and the State Department, there does seem to be mixed messages. But the latest message straight from the horse's mouth, as President Trump's press secretary said, is really about Diego Garcia rather than the whole deal. Yes. And I think that there's concern, it seems, that Diego Garcia has to be protected, particularly since it's the launch pad for American and British planes to the Middle East when there has been problems over there. And of course, at the moment, all eyes are on Iran. And I think that that's what's of concern. And also, this is in advance of an American delegation to Mauritius starting Monday, where the practicalities of how the treaty should pan out are being discussed directly between American representatives and Mauritian government representatives.
Got it. Just give us, Tessa, because I tell you what gets lost in all of this. I think a lot of people sort of pick up the story halfway through. Fair to say, with respect, I think most people would never have heard of the Chagos Islands had it not been for this particular story. Can you give us a kind of, just a very brief dummy's guide to Chagos, please?
Well, essentially, British government decided to give independence to Mauritius 60-odd years ago, and they decided to keep Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands as a strategic base for America as well. And so they paid Mauritius some funds to announce that they would acknowledge that we were keeping the Chagos Islands. And symbolically, at least, if not legally, that kind of meant that Mauritius and the British government had acknowledged that the Chagos Islands were part of Mauritius back then, but had decided to separate Mauritius from the Chagos Islands. There is some controversy about that, of course. Fast forward to now, and in 2019, the International Court of Justice did give an advisory opinion that, in fact, Britain should not have sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. It should go to Mauritius because the independence deal hadn't been completed. And soon after, the United Nations General Assembly actually voted majority in favor of Mauritius, alongside India and all the countries in the African Union, and also Mauritius itself and the Seychelles. And now we have a situation where the government has signed a treaty with Mauritius, but it hasn't yet gone through Parliament. So the big question is, can all the different ways campaigners and opposition to this treaty deal, can they stop it in different ways? or ultimately, is it up to Parliament, where MPs will soon vote, unless it gets pulled, this treaty, on whether they support it or not?
And I also sort of hear that, and this is very sort of layman's term stuff, I guess, in this respect, Tessa, that, you know, over those years, there's been all sorts of legal ramifications and claims and goodness knows what, costing an absolute ton to the British government. And there was a view inside Whitehall that, can we get rid of this thing, please? Because it's costing us a lot of money. Is that fair?
Well, there is talk that their civil servants have been at war with each other behind the scenes. Over the years, I've actually spoken to former civil servants who have told me privately that they actually support the Mauritian cause because I guess they believe that there is an anti-colonial argument that Britain should no longer have the Chagos Islands. At the same time, yes, there are reports coming out that some civil servants actually oppose the deal, have the opposite view, and they are about to leak emails. That is the reports coming out. So I think in the end, we have to say, what is the democratic position here that we should all support? And one is the Chagos and their rights for Chagossians on the islands, and the other is the British people. It is our sovereign territory, and we should decide, and our representatives should decide, and that's why all eyes should be on the vote in Parliament.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up, really. I mean, there is a slightly more crude view of this, and that is that people like Keir Starmer and Hermer, his Attorney General, it's just in their DNA. It's this kind of thing that keeps them awake at night, thinking of a flipping Union Jack flying over an island in a distant part of the world. It reminds them of that whole colonial thing, and that's not in their politics. They hate all of that, and that's why they are perhaps quite enthused and almost immovable in this position.
Well, yes, you can sort of look at it just through the lens of the Labour government and their former and current positions as lawyers and international lawyers and their work before. But don't forget, this is a world opinion. This is the United Nations coming together saying the islands should be with Mauritius. Whether you agree with it or not, that's what they said. But at the end of the day, we have to follow a democratic process because this shouldn't be about civil servants deciding. We didn't elect them. It should be about us. The people are sovereign and our representatives.
100%.
And for the Chagos people, they have rights because they used to live there and were forcibly removed.
Yeah.
And I'm actually on the road just now because I've just come from Bernadette Dugas, who is one of the leading campaigners, and she was actually born on Diego Garcia. And she's just told me, I've just come from her house, that she supports Misley Mandarin and the group of Chagossians on the Chagos Islands. And if she had the money, she would be there as well. That's what she's told me this afternoon.
And I would have thought it's fairly, wherever anybody stands on this, you know, we can talk about the United Nations. I know people have their own views on the authenticity of the United Nations. It's got a grand title. It sounds like it's almost this godlike Oracle of Delphi, but, you know, others will say, hang on, it's just another bureaucracy. Either way, ultimately, it would not be unreasonable, it would not be an extreme position or it would be an objective position to suggest that surely the people that live there, the population, are those that ultimately would get the say.
Well, yes, but of course they were removed, so it's not a clear-cut situation in the sense that it's not like the Falklands where,
where people still live there,
They were removed. So in a way, they were removed and sent to different countries, Mauritius, Seychelles, and now some of them are in Britain. Well, about half the population in Britain. And, you know, for them to unite when they've been so dispersed, poverty-stricken, and even in Britain, you know, I've spoken to people who've been made homeless. They have no guarantee of a house in Britain and a roof over their heads. So it's no surprise that a group of Chagossians now have gone, you know, we've basically had enough. We are going to just go back to our homeland and stay there, and that's what we want. Of course, there are other factors at play. In terms of the laws to do with the Chagos Islands and who can go there or not. But the fact is, it has been an appalling situation and human suffering for Chagossians, many of whom were born there and are getting older. And every month you see on Facebook and their groups Chagossians who have passed away. And it is incredibly sad.
Tessa, very thorough stuff. Great to have you on. Thank you, Tessa Clark, editor of the Chagos Files. Your thoughts on that? Is this just a pet project for Starmer and Hermer and co, because they loathe the idea of any kind of colonial existence, the echoes of, the memories of? Is it all of that? Trump's position does change. He's not talking about all of the Chagos Islands, etc. I mean, it's tricky. And we can look at this, and I think many people, you know, it is another stick to beat Starmer with. There he goes again. Look, well, he's giving away our territory. It's arguably more complex than just that, although it is that as well. Your response, 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word back to where we are on this story of Chagos. Laura is in Wiltshire. Laura, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Just listening to your conversation with your last interviewee.
Yes.
She's going on about a UN decision and how serious and democratic that is. It wasn't. It was a recommendation from the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the countries on that in the UN who voted with that, they're all strangely indebted to the Chinese. And the Mauritian people, the Mauritius, have treated the Chagosians appallingly. I mean, in a truly, if you were a human rights lawyer, in a racially abusive way. That's why a lot of them are here, and they desperately want to remain British. So let's not kid ourselves that a UN recommendation is something democratic.
Yeah.
It's really not.
No, I did make that point to her that, you know, people run away with, oh, the United Nations said so, therefore it must be true, which is a sort of a fairly anti-intellectual position, but one that is held by politicians all over the flipping planet, I think.
But I mean, Ian, when you consider the behaviour of the UN in Gaza recently and all of that, you know, I don't think the UN's fit for purpose anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, and the UN Council, Security Council, have got Iran on there and Russia. So how seriously do we take them anyway?
Yeah. It's a good point. Thank you very much indeed for that. Love it. Laura, thank you very much indeed. One from Kevin who says, Ian, on another down-market news organisation. Reforms UK's Richard Tice called Tommy Robinson's crowd that lot, right after that huge Unite the Kingdom march in London, packed with mixed protesters. He said, we want nothing to do with him or that lot. But of course, context matters. Yeah, and I think that, thank you for supplying the context as well, Kev, in that respect, because it does I knew Richard Tice would not have just talked about working class people as being that lot. He's clearly talking about a very specific support group when he says that lot, which is another divide, of course. If you start to bring in that card with where the, you know, I notice a lot of that group, that lot, as some would put it, are more likely to favour a Rupert Lowe position. Does Rupert Lowe want that support? I think he probably is okay with that. It's a democracy after all. Chris is in Epsom on this very point of the who wins the fight for the right. Chris, what do you think? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. It's not a fight for the right. It's a fight for what is right.
Okay.
First of all, Rupert Lowe, I have the utmost respect for. I think he's one of the hardest working MPs I've ever seen in all the years that I've watched politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's a very moral man as well. And he's certainly not doing it for the money. I think he has an ego, like most businessmen. They have to believe in themselves. They have to be confident. I think that got him into trouble with Nigel and the reform. I wish it hadn't. I wish he'd have wound his neck in, but he wouldn't. So he's off with Restore. Ben Habib, let's remember, he stood for Parliament. He was the deputy leader. He stood for Parliament. He didn't win the seat. He couldn't remain as deputy leader, not having a seat. So Richard Tice took it over. And let's not forget, Richard Tice and Dr. David Ball started Reform in David Ball's garage. So, and every time that Ben Habib is a very intelligent man, but he acts like a jilted bride. Every time I see him on TV, he spends 95% of his time slagging Nigel off. And between the pair of them, They haven't got the political nous of Nigel.
But if they,
knows-
okay, no, I get what you're saying, Chris. But if you put advance and restore, so Ben and Rupert together as one party, that irredeemably that will have a dent in the original voting base that Reform had. Surely,
I think personally that when push comes to shove, although some people will gravitate towards Rupert and Ben, and their egos are pulling this split, nothing else. People will realise as it goes along that Nigel has the political nous. He knows he has to take the middle ground with him, like Tony Blair did in the 90s, if he's going to win the past-the-post vote.
that is absolutely true. Yeah, people say the middle ground has gone, but it hasn't completely gone, and you need to be able to hoover up that area, and you've got to do it with some level of credibility. But when Rupert Lowe talks about deportations of people, I know that the word deportation is tricky because it's been weaponised, and people on the left in particular will run with that and say, look, this is proof it's a racist party. But you now have Nigel Farage distancing himself from Rupert Lowe's deportation position, saying it's impossible, and Layla Cunningham and others making the point that it's even more than that. It's actually also fairly neo-Nazi stuff.
At the moment, because they're not explaining their positions very well, Restore and Advance, because they get limited media exposure, and certainly not in the mainstream. People are believing it to be very fascist and very right wing. I haven't seen Layla or heard Layla say that, and that does surprise me that she said that.
Yeah, well, I was quoting what a previous guest had suggested she'd said, but there is that view, isn't there, that you've now got Reform who are taking a hard position against deportations.
I don't think Reform are taking a hard position against deportations. I think they're looking at it sensibly, and they're looking at what the middle ground and the slightly right of centre will go along with.
I think that's a fair point. Listen, I've got to stop there, Chris, just for time. Great call, though, to start us off on that one. Over to you. Who will win the fight on the right? You have Advance UK, Restore Britain and Reform UK. Half an hour ago, none of these parties existed. It was the Tories' position, and, of course, arguably the reason why the Tories flunked it is because they failed to listen, particularly to those voices that have an appetite for sort of sensible centre-right policies. 0344 499 1000. Thoughts on that? If we hear any more on the former Prince Andrew, whatever his name is this week, we'll bring you that right here on Talk as well. Chagos also on the agenda too, and more on the way. 23 minutes after 2 o'clock, this is Talk.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Julian.
joining
Nice
us.
to be back with you again.
Well, I mean, again, extraordinary circumstances. It's the former prince's 66th birthday. He's lost his HRH, he's lost his prince, he's lost his dukedom, lost all his titles, lost his big fancy house in Royal Lodge in Windsor, banished to the Sandringham estate. What was your first reaction when you heard that he had actually been arrested?
Well, at long last, is my reaction. I've been calling out for this, frankly, for nearly 6 years, ever since the allegation emerged.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Carl in Derbyshire, who says, since Nigel Farage came back into politics and took charge of reform, he's never hidden away from the fact that he wanted to replace the Tory party and restore true conservative values to the right of British politics. For me, he's done just that. Yes, I too wish Farage would democratise reform, but at the moment they are the only game in town. It's a really good point, and I think what I think David Bull, of course, who's a mate and formerly of this parish, along with Richard Tice, who I know very well too, what they have done, and remember, you could hate the bones of a political party, but I think everyone now, when you see the other two parties who are sort of still finding their feet and arguing it out and establishing their position, it actually rather does Reform quite a favour, because Reform looked like the finished deal, finished as in they've gone through all of that. They are a party. They can put on a big conference that looks, $1 million. They've now got positions, as Rob Jenrick is now Shadow Chancellor for Reform. They look they have a presence in Parliament. They look like a party waiting to happen. They might only have half a dozen or 7 MPs, but they look like they're ready. Ready to go. It doesn't look like a campaign group. It looks much more than that. And that always makes it do. The questions become tougher as you, if you like, professionalise yourself on that journey. Jules is in Bedford on this point. Jules, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Hi, Ian.
Hiya.
So Nigel has been around a long time. He's a very canny operator, and he has spent literally decades protecting himself and his position from any plausible accusation of racism. That mud just doesn't stick. And every time somebody calls him a racist, the only person who looks like an idiot is the person using that language, not Nigel. Meanwhile, Restore and Advance, some of their policies seem very ethnically based to me. And Nigel has always been clear that if you're British, regardless of the colour of your skin or your heritage, you're British. That's it. That's what counts. And his policies are very, very clear on that. They're very, very broadly based. And I would use the term colourblind. Whereas Restore and Advance, that doesn't really seem how it is to me. And I pay fairly close attention to these things. So what I wanted to say was, in the run-up to the next election, the term racist is going to be used and overused a lot. But I think that mud is going to stick to Restore and Advance in a way that it can't and shouldn't stick to Reform.
and in a way, as I was just saying a second ago, Jules, it sort of does Nigel Farage quite a favour, doesn't it? Because if that tag of racist party, which, as you rightly say, Farage has spent years getting rid of, because it was always a cheap jibe to throw at anybody that has even a scintilla of a policy on immigration. That's now gone elsewhere.
Exactly. Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. So now we have the marvellous situation of, you remember the old joke, politics far to the right of Genghis Khan?
Yeah.
Well, well, Nigel Farage is Genghis Khan, and we then got Restore and Advance further to the right than him.
Yeah, there you are. Who'd have thought we'd be in this place? Interesting times, Jules. Thank you very much indeed. That's Jules in Bedford. He makes a good point. I mean, I think that's where it's going to kind of end up. It is almost on the wish list, I would imagine, of reform that Restore or Advance are seen in that kind of, English Defence League kind of territory, because it does them a royal favour of almost once and for all ridding themselves of that issue. Mark's in Glasgow on this one. What have you got for us, Mark? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, we have seen quite something this morning with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
We have.
Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
Being arrested for, what was it, misuse of public information?
Misconduct in a public office.
Thank you. However, we haven't seen or heard a squeak about Mr. no longer Lord Mandelson, the golden boy of Tony Blair. And I've noticed Tony Blair yesterday on the last few days is back on our tellies, softening us up, I suspect, for his presidential address. But my concern is, well, seriously, Blair is absolutely running Starmer. That's why Starmer is utterly clueless. There's no question about that. And Mandelson was put in and has been kept in very nice jobs because of his connections to Blair and Blair's gratitude. And, of course, they're all members of this sort of rather secretive Fabian society. But that aside, Mandelson seems to have a charmed life. Fraud, corruption have followed him through his career. They now know, because of the Epstein files, that he was dishing out secrets about the banking systems and bailouts and so on. But strangely, the police haven't mentioned a word about him, and that it's
he did get raided the other day. Of course, when I say raided, I mean they went round to his 2 homes and took away some stuff. So one assumes there is an ongoing investigation. I don't know why the former Prince Andrew was arrested immediately. And Mandelson's home was visited by the police, but he wasn't arrested. I don't know what the logistics of that are. Different, and also they're different police forces.
There's a point there. The fact that Andrew seems to be the fall guy for all of the Democrats and billionaire businessmen, and particularly the men who were on Epstein Island. Bill Clinton, particularly. Again, the BBC running some sop of a program with his wife claiming he was only there because of his charitable interests on Epstein Island 20 times and on the private jet. Come on. And the BBC pandering to that, not questioning it. The whole thing does appear that it's going to look over there, everyone. It's Prince Andrew, a royal prince, being done. Meanwhile, the attention is taken away from all of the Democrats.
Well, that's an interesting point. Because we did a little cursory look before the show, and the Prince Andrew story is on every front page across the planet right now, from Australia through to Bulgaria, through to the United States. It's literally everywhere. So it's certainly, if that was the plan, to make a distraction, it's had that effect.
It's worked.
Yeah. Mark, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more on that story. And, of course, at some point today, I would imagine, that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor will be released from custody. We will, of course, have our eye on that story too. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk Across.
This from Matt, who says, it feels as if all parties, new and old, are trying to define my Britishness for me. I'm British, English specifically. If I said that Britishness is a spirit, not a colour, creed, faith or politics, and that it hinges on a profound belief in good manners and fair play, I believe that would ring true with many. Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it sort of emboldens a whole load of things, and I suppose that's no different to any, if you ask a French person, there's that Rick Stein line that I've repeated a couple of times, that he's worked obviously a lot as a top chef in France, and he made the point that of all the things, his culinary endeavours over years, his one takeaway thing from France is that the French absolutely love being French. They love it. It's just like, yeah, I'm French, so what? Get in there. It's just like a great thing. I'm French. And I guess the British, there is some of that, but it's sort of taken on some curious tones, hasn't it, over the last bunch of years for rather unfortunate reasons. Matt, I hear you. Great callers, great message as well. Thank you. Now, the BBC has found that vulnerable women and girls as young as 14 are being lured into a world of forced sex by gangs in London. That's an interesting headline. I clocked this yesterday. I wonder if Sadiq Khan's going to push back when he's asked questions such as this.
I'm asking you, do we have those sort of gangs in London?
I'm not sure why she's so nervous to say what she means. What do you mean?
No. I am saying exactly what I mean. I'm saying, have we got any of those grooming gangs in London?
I'm unclear, Chair, what is meant by the question. If you could spell it out, I can answer.
I've just spelt it out. Are you not listening? It's the sort of gangs that groom young girls at a young age for sex. Exactly how much clearer do you want me to be?
Susan Hall for the Conservatives questioning the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Not his finest moment. I think we could all agree on that. Let's speak with Alan Collins, partner and solicitor advocate at Bolton Burden Kemp. Alan, good afternoon to you. Look, I mean, it's always a difficult one here. I mean, you know this area of child abuse very well as a lawyer. There's no pecking order here. There's no that one's worse than that one. There should be no league table. Assault and exploitation of children, regardless of what the context is horrific, and we've seen too much of it. But I'm going to ask nonetheless, does this BBC investigation distinguish itself in any way from what you can gather from other allegations and stories of grooming gangs?
I think it's a very important piece of work because it highlights what I've been saying for a long time, that sexual exploitation of children and young people is a nationwide problem. There can't be any corner of the UK that's not affected by this. And to think that it's limited to certain towns and cities would be very naive as well as misleading and not doing justice to the gravity of it all. We have to recognise that children and young people get used, not just for sexual exploitation, but get caught up by the criminality of it all, and are used by what I would describe as organised crime. It could be drug curing, that type of thing. Yeah. And it is not an isolated, remote problem that happens on some other part of the planet that we don't have to inhabit, if you see what I mean.
Indeed. In terms of what the BBC believe they've uncovered, and I think I read something within this particular investigation, that these were and are gangs that exist, and they often utilise the services as runarounds or go-tos of young people, and within the whole, the wider entity of criminality, sexual assaults and rapes take place, as distinct from other forms of grooming, which are the sole purpose is for sexual exploitation. Is that I'm probably putting it slightly in a clunky way,
no,
but is that a fair
way.
distinction?
It's a fair description. As I said, I think the point that has to be recognised is that the grooming gangs are not, as it were, from another planet. They are here in our country, in our towns and cities and so on, and they are part of those sort of communities where you often find the victims and the survivors. And these young people, children, get used not just for the sexual exploitation, but for other areas of crime. And so you see cases, for example, of a child, a young person being taken from one part of the country to another part of the country. And it may well be purely for sexual exploitation, but it will be caught up quite often with other areas of crime. But as I said, for example, curing drugs. There's a lot of money behind all of this. It's not just some wicked people, some evil people wanting to abuse children. I don't want to detract from that aspect of it because that is sort of central. But there's a market there. There's a criminal enterprise where there are criminals making money out of all of this, not just the sexual exploitation, but drugs and whatever else might be happening.
So wherever there are vulnerable children, there will be there's going to be exploitation. I guess it's interesting not to make light of this in any way, Alan. I went to see the musical Oliver over Christmas with the family. And it was only on the way home I was sort of thinking about it, because you sort of watch this sort of romantic Dickens story sort of played out, and, these little toe rags and these little characters leading this, what in one respect could be seen as quite an exciting life, away from working for this, this thief and all that went with it. But of course, the upshot of that was that these things happened, and that was how many children existed throughout that era. And yes, some of them might have, through literature and film, be portrayed in it's almost a romantic way, the sort of artful dodger kind of figure. But these were abused kids, of course, and whether they were abused in terms of violence, whether they were abused in the workplace, whether they were abused sexually, and of course that would have gone on. But my takeaway from it is that isn't. I was watching something set in the past, but this is still going on in the present.
Indeed, what's the saying? Everything changes, nothing changes. And Dickens and his very detailed accounts of what was happening in the 1860s and 70s in London and elsewhere, you could sort of lift from that time and transport it to 2026, and that begs the question: we're supposed to be civilized and more advanced and better educated and better equipped in so many ways compared to 150 years ago. And, I don't want to be depressing about it, but sometimes you have to wonder, actually, have we evolved?
Well, indeed,
this is 2026, this shouldn't be happening.
Indeed, and that was kind of my takeaway from it. And I was just, I look at these stories, that whether it's the BBC one and the ongoing sort of grooming gangs inquiry. I know there was a kind of an unofficial, not to in any way reduce it, but an unofficial inquiry by Rupert Lowe's party last week, or in the last couple of weeks, and there is still the official one to have. We've had the Baroness J report, the Cass report, all of these things that are kind of out there. But the question that screams from all of this, Alan, there's a lot of fog in this. Are we going to get justice? Are we going to get to a place where we don't see this? Or do we have to resign ourselves to the terrible reality, the irredeemable reality that, sadly, like all forms of criminality, this is always going to go on?
I like to think I'm an optimist and the glass is half full. I think with what's been happening in the last couple of years, it is very difficult for the powers that be, if I can put it like that, to ignore. There have been lots of inquiries and reports over the years which have gathered dust. It's unforgivable that, here we are in 2026 and we've got to have this inquiry into grooming gangs. It shouldn't be necessary, but it's happening and it cannot be ignored. This is a story, but it's not going to go away. And I think every time there's a bit of publicity, whilst it may be shocking and upsetting and so on, it probably is good for the public consciousness. And if it helps one vulnerable child or young person to escape, then that's to the good, isn't it? If we can actually save at least one of these young people from all of this, then we're not wasting our time.
Indeed. And I suppose what one hopes for is that recent publicity on child exploitation in this respect you kind of live in hope that at least establishment areas, whether it's law enforcement, policing, social services, council workers, all those areas that we know have been inept, criminally so in many respects, in taking seriously those allegations, perhaps will think again now, because you'd like to think we've at least turned a bit of a corner, because these kids receive a double injustice, right? They firstly, they're exploited and they have a horrendous experience, whether it's violent or sexual, and invariably it is both. But then when they go to report it, and we know this from the many stories that have come through in the last few years, you'd think knocking on the door of the police station would be enough to sort it out. But for many of these kids, it wasn't. In fact, it was the start of the next nightmare, because not only had they been abused, they were ignored. And by the very agent of social workers or council workers, goodness me. I mean, we use that word cover-up as if it's a conspiracy. That's literally what has happened to young people.
In one sense, I understand where you're coming from, but when these things are exposed and you look back to see where it all went wrong, it's often a case of indifference rather than a deliberate will to ignore what is going on. It's often shades of grey and a lack of accountability, indifference, attitudes, poor attitudes, that kind of thing, which is all unforgivable. And so that's why there are calls for there to be a law that says if there's a suspicion of child abuse, it must be reported. Yeah. It can't be ignored. And if you don't report it, you're going to get into trouble for not reporting it. Yeah. And I think we're now in a position societally, so to speak, where I like to think that we've turned the corner, but it's going to require political will. It's going to require government of whatever hue to change the law on this and lead from the front, so that it is no longer acceptable. There are concerns, for those concerns not to be reported and addressed. Yeah. And I think we're gradually edging towards all of that kind of position, but it will require political will. Whether that will come about, I think the jury's out, so to speak. But we are in a different place in 2026 to say where we were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And there was too much of that sort of, we've spoken to victims ourselves on the programme, kids who, had not the best start in life. They started drinking earlier, experimenting with drugs or whatever. They were known sometimes to the police. And then, of course, they suddenly make an accusation, and the dismissive nature of, whether it's the police or someone else is, oh God, they're always causing trouble, that one, I've nicked them 6 times just this year. They're always out drinking, starting a fight. And that was almost enough to reduce their credibility somewhat as a witness.
Yeah, victim blaming. Yeah. There's been a lot of victim blaming in the past, which again is unforgivable, but that's the way it was. And I think I'd like to think we are a long way away from that kind of attitude that we used to see. I don't believe it's gone entirely, to be frank about it, but I think we are a long way from where it once was.
Yeah, I hope so. Alan, great to have you on with us, sir. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Julia.
joining
Nice
us.
to be back with you again.
Well, I mean, again, extraordinary circumstances. It's the former prince's 66th birthday. He's lost his HRH, he's lost his prince, he's lost his dukedom, lost all his titles, lost his big fancy house in Royal Lodge in Windsor, banished to the Sandringham estate. What was your first reaction when you heard that he had actually been arrested?
Well, at long last, is my reaction. I've been calling out for this, frankly, for nearly 6 years, ever since the allegation emerged.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. We are going to go back to your calls. Loads to get through. That whole fight for the right, will come to that. And, of course, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, which we'll come to in literally just a second. Before we do, it's Voice of Doom, and we're on day 19 of this one. This is almost at record levels, and I'm really surprised, by the way. For those who don't know, this is a mystery voice, but it's political. So you're looking for a politician, dead or alive, left-wing, right-wing, whatever, male, female, whatever party, etc. You know the drill. Very simple task. Who is this?
This is your chance.
And let's hear that again.
This is your chance.
And again.
This is your chance.
87222. Just message 87222 if you think you know who that is. It's not Rupert Lowe, which is a common guess. There's a couple of other quite common guesses as well that come through on this. It's not him. It's not Christopher Hitchens or Peter Hitchens. Also guess quite regularly. Have another listen.
This is your chance.
87222. If we get a right answer, we'll tell you who it is on the other side of the news at 3. Now, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has been arrested and is in custody on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. That's all we know so far. It happened early this morning. Thames Valley Police carried out the arrest. Let's speak with Valentine Lowe, writer and journalist. Valentine, good afternoon to you. It is a serious crime. Innocent until proven guilty, no charges, full denial at Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's end, as it were. All of that considered. Nonetheless, this is a place I would imagine the former prince would rather not be right now.
Absolutely not. I mean, the Jeffrey Epstein thing has been dogging him for years and years, since, was it 2011? And, you know, it is still doing it. And it's only this year that it got much, much more serious. I mean, the allegations about Virginia Giuffre were serious enough, but now the supposedly disclosing of confidential government information takes it to a different realm. And the police didn't want to get involved with the Virginia Giuffre stuff. They've got involved now.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I mean, there's lots of things that are quite hard to prove when things happened many years ago, but what we do know is there does certainly seem to be a bit of an email trace and journey on some of what he's been accused of, whilst we can't, you know, say confidently that it led to a gain from one person as a result of his specific information will come out in due course. But we can't underestimate how serious the offence is, though. I mean, this, I think, potentially carries life imprisonment.
It does, but I think it's, from what I understand, it's a notoriously difficult charge to make stick. It's a common law offence, and there's quite a high bar in terms of what you have to prove. So, you know, there's an uphill struggle here for any prosecuting authorities should they choose to make charges.
Yeah. I would assume, and I don't know what your intel is on the inside of a custody suite, Valentine, but from everything I've seen and from what I can gather, I don't imagine you're treated much differently to anyone else when you're arrested like this. There's a protocol, you are photographed, you are fingerprinted, and at some point you'll probably sit for a little while in a cell before they interview you.
Yeah, sit for a little while in a cell contemplating your past mistakes.
Yeah.
Plenty of time to rue that.
Well, indeed, and in a case such as this, I mean, look, you know, a criminal act is a criminal act regardless of who has committed it, but you're always forced to kind of think what it feels like if somebody has spent their life living in an opulent existence, mostly in palaces with carpets thicker than most people's walls, then to find yourself in this position must be, I mean, that's a height to fall from.
And Andrew is someone who's always stood on his dignity. I mean, there are plenty of anecdotes around about people calling him Andrew and him correcting them, saying it's Prince Andrew to you.
Yes.
So him to be banged up in some nick somewhere with police officers who, if he's lucky, will call him Sir. But other than that, he's Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, and it's a long way to have fallen.
I would imagine, maybe it goes without saying, but you know, anyone's entitled to a lawyer. I'd imagine he's got a fairly tasty lawyer on the case.
I would imagine so, yes, exactly.
Valentine, thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate that. Valentine Lowe, writer and journalist. We've yet to get any other information. The police will probably not comment beyond saying that we interviewed a 66-year-old man. He's now been released on bail pending further inquiries. You can probably expect that line to come out, I would guess, within the next 4 or 5 hours or something to that effect, unless there is something more substantial in terms of the information the police have gleaned from their initial takeaway of whatever they removed, usually computer equipment, phones, iPads, that kind of stuff. Goodness me. I mean, that would be revealing to any police department investigating something when it's a high-profile arrest. This comes in from Dan, who says, Britishness is something built up since the war, Ian. Absolutely, the French are French and the Italians are Italians. But there's only one European victor in World War II, and it's Britain. This pride over the years has eroded into shame by the woke, horrible left. Miserable party poopers. Yeah, there's a bit of that going on, isn't there? Love it. Ian's down in London. Ian, on this point about the fight for the right, what are you thinking? Afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian. I cannot believe you had 3 speakers on, and quite truthfully, they just, in essence, sounded like thugs at times. It was like all this business about hanging and everything. Everybody that I know are only interested in 2 or 3 things. 1, to be able to earn money. 2, to be able to feed their children and feel safe.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's like saying, oh, we're going to ban fox hunting and everything. That didn't win general elections. Hanging is not going to win general elections. What they want is they want to feel safe. They want to know they're going to get the right medical attention and all of that. And the way that the 3 of them all spoke, you're thinking that all they're doing is splitting the right-wing vote, which then opens the door for Labour or whoever, like the other idiots that are ruining the country at the moment, are just going to stay in. I just don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, in terms of...
You're bemused.
Well, I'm bemused by the whole thing, because you couldn't have made this story up a year ago, Ian, that you'd have 3 parties now, and that doesn't... Obviously, there's also the Tories, but put them to one side. You've got 3 parties battling this one out. Ian, I've got to move because the news is upon us. Thank you to UK John, who says, if you're going to have a debate about right-wing parties, then you should be clued up as to what they are saying and what they do and won't do. To say Reform are against deportations is completely false. I never said that. I said they're against the deportations that Rupert Lowe is advancing. Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage himself made a statement saying mass deportations cannot happen. He's on record. In fact, we might even get the clip of that for you in the next hour, John. Of course, they have an immigration policy. They have an immigration policy around boats and the crossings and turning them around and putting a stop to it. But the Rupert Lowe form of deportations is not the same position that Nigel Farage has, which is somewhat the reason why Rupert Lowe currently exists. News at 3.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. Loads to get through here. We are, of course, keeping you up to date on what is happening with the Duke of York arrested, or the former, I should say, Duke of York, now just Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Thames Valley Police swooped on his home this morning, arrested him. He's now in custody, facing questioning over misconduct in a public office. The first senior member of the royal family in modern history to be arrested, and on his 66th birthday. More on that shortly. Also this afternoon, the battle is on for the right as Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain launched itself as a political party in the last few days. But who gets your vote? Is it Restore? Is it Advance? Or is it Reform? More on that. Loads of coming through on that. And Sir Keir Starmer will defy Donald Trump by pressing ahead with the handover of the Chagos Islands. The US president has warned the Prime Minister that he's making a big mistake by entering into this 100-year lease with Mauritius. Comments on that are welcome as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Loads of comes with more of your messages as well in a second. So much to get through at this end, including this story. Some of the world's biggest manufacturers are writing off billions as they retract from the world of EVs, as in electric vehicles. It seems that the aggressive bet on the world of EVs has dramatically backfired. What is going on? Let's speak to Robert Llewellyn, founder of the Fully Charged Show, and you'll know Robert from all manner of programmes as well. Robert, good afternoon to you. So what is happening? Is it the EV dream is over, or it's just a bit of a bump in the road?
Good afternoon. Yes, I think it would be premature to say the EV dream is over. It is a bump in the road. I've just checked before I came on just to make sure I knew what I was saying. Global car sales are down. All cars, petrol, diesel, catastrophic, 80% since 2020, an 80% drop. So that would be a big story. No one is buying diesel vehicles, and yet Stellantis have decided to start making them again. So that is kind of an odd choice for them. It's very specifically European and North American companies that are backtracking a bit. But, you know, we've just recently interviewed the CEO of Renault, who are going absolutely gangbusters with electric vehicles. So it's very difficult to get an overall picture. I think it's fair to say the press will generally jump on a negative electric vehicle story. It really feeds into a sort of narrative. They don't work, they're rubbish. We've had them rammed down our throats by liberal do-gooders, all that kind of nonsense. And yet people are buying them. If you drive around the UK, you will see thousands of electric cars. There's 1.8 million electric cars on the road in the UK. When I first drove one, there was probably a dozen.
Yeah.
In 2010, you know, so something has changed. And, you know, to say that it's the end of the EV dream, one, it's not a dream. Two, I always want to remind people that the reason the effort has gone into producing electric vehicles is because the gases that come out of our exhaust pipes are not beneficial or benign. There is a reason that we've gone to this hassle, and there's a reason that the technology has developed that makes it possible to use a vehicle that keeps you warm and dry and gets you from A to B, that doesn't burn fuel.
And I wonder as well, Robert, whether there is still... It seems to me, and I make this example every time, if I go to buy a second-hand car and somebody says, oh, it's a mid-range XC60 Volvo, for example, and it's got 60,000 miles on the clock and it's 6 years old. My brain can quickly do the calculation on what that means. So 60,000, so 10,000 a year. Wow, it's pretty good. And it's a Volvo, so it can do 3-4 times that before it starts to climb up. I know what that means. If somebody says, here's an electric vehicle, it's 6 years old, it's done 60,000, I don't really know what that means. I don't know whether that's a good... Is that a risk? Is that normal? And I suppose that second-hand market, although it's got better, but the industry, the EV industry, is still relatively new. So there's still an issue with the second-hand market in terms of getting cheaper cars. So I guess that's an issue for some people, just price. But secondly, our lack of real knowledge about these things.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. That is, I think, the biggest challenge. I think the two big challenges for the UK specifically are the people who have nowhere off the street to park a car. You don't need a garage, but you need somewhere. If you've got somewhere off the street, you can park a car, you can charge it at home. The savings are, you know, irrefutable. They are. It is enormously cheaper to maintain and run an electric car than a petrol one. If you have to charge using public chargers, and that's the only choice you have, then it's more debatable and it's more hassle as well. So there's no question that that's 40% of British households have nowhere off the streets. But that's one. The second one is, as you say, is just our lack of knowledge about them. What we now know is, particularly cars that have been made in, say, the last 3 or 4 years, the arguments about batteries, it's so hard to counter them, and it's all I do for most of my adult life, the last 10 years, is the batteries will definitely outlast the cars. So the batteries will last, we're talking a 10, 20-year life of the batteries, and they'll still be working after 20 years, but they may have reduced their overall capacity by something like 5 or 10%.
Right.
So they will have gone down in their total range. But that's after 20 years, and we're talking millions of miles. I've seen a car that has done 666,000 miles on its first battery. And you go, well, that's ridiculous. But then the guy who owned it said, oh, I won't tell you about the rest of the car. I've had new steering, new suspension, new tyres, new seats in the interior. Everything had been had worn out and broken in that 66,000 miles, but not the battery. So we need to learn. One of the great things you can do now, if you're going to buy a second-hand car, you can get someone to come and look at the car, plug a little wire in under the dashboard, and it will tell you exactly and precisely the state of the battery.
Right.
And they're generally about 98% of their original capacity after 60,000 miles.
That's interesting to clarify.
But people don't know that. I mean, you're absolutely right. People don't know that. Yeah. They've been told again and again, you'll have to throw the batteries away.
Well, I tell you what, I think of it, Robert, like I think of a mobile phone. You know, I mean, I was talking to a mate of mine who deals in mobiles and iPads and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, whenever he's buying one, he's asking about battery life, and he does the test. You know, how many rotations has it done of this, and there's only 20% left really in it. So you're kind of mentally, if that's your only comparison, that's kind of what you think, you know. But that's that's quite interesting.
It is. I mean, it's important. I think it's important to point out that the reserve that is around a battery. So when you're told this battery has 65 kilowatt hours, what it actually has is about 72 kilowatt hours of possible storage. But that extra bit is used as a buffer, and that extra buffer is about 3,500 mobile phones.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a very different scale that you're talking about with a car battery.
So in terms of sales, I mean, somebody here, Carl, has just said, nobody wants electric cars. January has seen a drop in electric sales. But you're sort of slightly countering that, Robert, with saying that there's been a drop with all sales.
Yeah, I want to meet these nobody. I've not met a... I love the fact you could say some people don't want electric cars, and that's perfectly acceptable, but not nobody. I mean, 1.8 million is not nobody. That's how many people have driven them. So in that sense, it's very wrong. Sales of all vehicles have gone down. People don't buy cars in January. It's the same in China, where sales have gone down. They still sold 600,000 battery electric vehicles in China in January. So yes, they were down from December. But, you know, they're not stopped. Yeah. You know, and there are people, I think, such as your caller, who are very keen for electric vehicles to not exist at all. And I find it a bit baffling because, I mean, it's just a different way of making a machine. You know, it's like you know, a landline phone and a mobile phone.
Yeah, true enough.
I can't remember people hating mobile phones. I think they did.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I hate them when somebody uses them on the train, but that's about it. So, but we all share that one, don't we?
We all share.
Listen, Robert, great to have you on, sir. Nice to speak. Robert Llewellyn, founder of the Fully Charged Show. It's an area that he deals in and he knows well. I haven't got a problem with the concept of electric cars. I think the idea that if you don't have one, you are going to kill the entire planet, or that, you know, people are dying because you happen to have a really tasty, brand spanking new top of the range petrol car which has passed all the usual European rules and regulations about emissions, etc. So yeah, I think that is a reasonable point to make. And yeah, if you can, you know, we all know that an exhaust pipe's going to knock out a bit of bad kit out of that old pipe. So brilliant. Yeah, if you think of, you know, an old bus back in the 70s. Remember the old, if you ever walked behind a bus between, if you were crossing the road and you got a mouthful of that old gunk, that was a pretty grim affair. It can still happen, by the way. So yeah, anything that addresses that is a good thing. That said, the evangelical nature of it, the kind of Sadiq Khan nature of it, is where it goes wrong for me. That if you haven't got one, somehow you're person non grata. And we also need to acknowledge that there is still the factor that we're not used to the whole thing. There's also the factor that not everybody can charge one. There's also the factor that they are still quite expensive. And yes, I know you can buy cheaper ones, but if you want an equivalent of what you're currently, if you've got a standard SUV at the moment, nothing, what's the Nissan called? The Nissan, anyway, it's gone. But that, yeah, Qashqai, is it something like that? Yeah, that'll do. With a Q. Let's invest one. That thing. If you wanted an electric equivalent of that, I don't think you would get it cheaper than you would if you bought the petrol version, if that makes sense. The type of vehicle. 0344 499 1000. Just before we talk to Michael in Birmingham, I had a message from John, who was slightly outraged that I talked about reform being against deportations. I thought, John and others, that it was a kind of a given when I'd said it. Clearly, they're not against deporting all people. They have a massive, in fact, central to everything is their policy on channel crossings, for example. I mean, I've interviewed, and I know these guys, by the way. So I've interviewed them so many times on this very point. Of course they do. I was referring to the deportations that Rupert Lowe is looking for. This is the clip I was referring to, Nigel Farage speaking about what Rupert Lowe wanted to do. And that's why Mr. Farage said they had to get rid of Rupert Lowe. Here it is.
You see, when he stood up and said that we've got to consider the mass deportation of entire communities, including those born in the United Kingdom, that just moves way beyond a point of reasonableness, of decency, of morality. And that was the moment at which, I realised we just had to get rid of him.
And he said that on a number of interviews, and there he was speaking at his own conference, reiterating that point, which was the point, happy to clarify for you, John, that I was echoing. Let's go to Michael in Birmingham. Michael, afternoon to you.
Hi there.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to stand for reform, and I'm 95% of the way there in the local elections. I'm beginning to wonder if I've made a mistake, because if Nigel's talking about, this centre ground and that clip that you've just played there, maybe he's got the wrong person in me. I don't know exactly what Rupert Lowe said, but being born in Britain doesn't necessarily insulate you from being deported. Why should it? I want... Look, if Reform think they're going to claim any sort of central ground, they're not. They're simply not. I've said this before. People aren't going to go from being a woke Labour voter or a Green or a Lib Dem and suddenly see the light and go to Reform. Forget them.
So you're saying it's not worth... in the same way that Labour have given up chasing Reform voters, Reform should give up chasing floating Tory or Labour voters?
Precisely. The only nuance that I would give on that is people like me, who are former Labour voters. I was brought up in Northern England in a Labour voting household, and Labour voters have often been socialist on economic things. I believe in nationalisation. I believe in public ownership of major utilities, but hard on immigration. My dad and his cronies down the pub are all like that. They were factory workers in Northern England. That Red Wall, they're the ones, they might go. But forget your Islington class. They ain't going to go down from Labour to Reform.
No, that's a good point.
When I stand here in Brummie, if I do, and I'm not sure that I will, I'll make no bones about it. I'm going to serve the Reform voters. If I offend the people who vote against me, that means I'm doing the right thing.
But the point that I think Nigel's making in that clip, which was the point that I was simply representing when I said it earlier that upset a couple of people, was that if your parents came over here, as an example, from Pakistan in the 1950s, and they've lived here forever, you were born here, you're now a 50-year-old person, do you stand a chance of being deported?
Well, to me, there's no statute of limitations. If people came here illegally...
but if they came here legally, they came here for,
If they came here legally, that's fine.
Okay.
But I mean, if anybody comes here legally, just because you've got away with it for 25, 30 years, you could be as nice as apple pie. To me, the clock goes back.
I agree with that if you are illegal. But I think also the point that Nigel's trying to make is that even if you wanted to do what you're talking about, that I think somebody said the other day it would take like 150 years if you to try to deport everyone that might have a question mark over them.
So what? It might take 150 years to get back all the student loans. Do we just give up on those? We haven't caught Jack the Ripper yet. Do we give up on that? You get what I mean. But there's no statute of limitations. You're liable to it. But what I'm more worried about than the specifics, the specific nuts and bolts of it, is I've been well worried that Nigel is Nigel. I mean, look, I wouldn't even have a drink with Nigel. He's not really my cup of tea as a bloke, to be honest. But is he trying to be this avuncular guy down the pub? And I've said before on this show, Ian, that if you're going to be in Reform, if you're going to be on what they call the right, you've got to tough it out. Forget being the nice guy. Forget pleasing everybody.
Well, and that's the kind of Rupert Lowe position. I saw him say to somebody somebody asked him, I can't honestly remember, I wouldn't be able to represent this very well, but they asked him something, about what he thinks of the plight of X, Y and Z, and he said, I don't give a shit, to be honest. And he was very blunt about it. He wasn't hiding it. He was saying, that is not my problem. My problem is people in this country, British people, that's who I want to represent, and that's the voices that I want to, galvanise.
Yeah, and so I want to be, and let's not forget the other side of this. I mean, there's been stories which have been swamped a bit about, left-wingers going around Brighton and Sheffield knocking on people's door about their support for Israel or not. And there's all sorts of other atrocities being committed by the left. They're as hard as anything on what they do, and reform has to be as well on the right. But one thing I will say, if you just indulge me with time, I think that the left is so cynical. We have to be careful about false flag members in Reform and Rupert Lowe's party and the other party too. They could plant people in there who are supporters of them, pretending to be them, and then say the most outrageous things to get them discredited. They have to be careful of that.
It's a fair point. Michael, that's been a great call. Really lovely to speak as well. Thank you, Michael in Birmingham. Couple of points on EVs. Sri says, your guest, Robert, is providing misinformation about battery degradation. They apparently degrade 2 to 3% per year, depending on use, just like a phone. He's doing the same as those on the opposite side of the argument. Brexit Duck says, now speak to a guy called Barry Crampton to find the truth about EV ownership costs, including depreciation. He says the cheapest cars to own over a 10-year period, including depreciation, is typically a small, reliable internal combustion engine vehicle, most often something like a Toyota Corolla. I did drive for ages a little Toyota, and it was ridiculously cheap, kept on going. When I say I mean, it wasn't just mine, it was like a family second car. And it just cost nothing to run, and always passed its MOT. It was a curious little thing. I thought at one point it was haunted, like some kind of Stephen King Christine thing. It's called Christine, wasn't it? The haunted car? Yeah, it was. I'm sure it was. Gary says 1.8 million cars in the UK are EVs. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Until you realise there are 35 million cars on the road in the UK. I did think about that as well. Good point. 0344 499 1000. Very quickly, Voice of Doom. Have we got a winner? The voice we played you just before the news at 3 o'clock sounded like this.
This is your chance.
Who is that? These are some of the guesses. Robert Jenrick, Jeffrey Archer, Chris Whitty, Norman Baker, Jim Cunningham, Dennis Healy, Dominic Grieve, Humphrey Atkins, Jeffrey Archer, Damien Green, John Redwood, Boris Johnson, Jonathan Aitken, John Gummer. They're just some of them. Can we hear it again, Sam?
This is your chance.
We have not got a winner. Day 20. Fast getting towards the record, which I think was 21 days or 24 or something. We're nearly there. And it's obscure. I'll tell you this. It is obscure, but it's not the most obscure. Goodness me. Details to come. Everything you need to know. All the breaking news right here on Talk. It's 20 past 3. We'll take a short pause. We're back after this.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Julia.
joining
Nice
us.
to be back with you again.
Well, I mean, again, extraordinary circumstances. It's the former prince's 66th birthday. He's lost his HRH, he's lost his prince, he's lost his dukedom, lost all his titles, lost his big fancy house in Royal Lodge in Windsor, banished to the Sandringham estate. What was your first reaction when you heard that he had actually been arrested?
Well, at long last, is my reaction. I've been calling out for this, frankly, for nearly 6 years, ever since the allegation emerged.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just to pick up on the Andrew Mountbatten Windsor story, of course, arrested around about 8 a.m. this morning. Nobody knows which police station he's been taken to. He remains in custody. Let's speak with the royal commentator, Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, good afternoon to you. Prince Andrew, of course, a man, or former Prince Andrew, he likes title, he likes royal decorum. He did seem to be a man who enjoyed status and demanded, I think it's fair to say, respect for his position and that of his fellow royals. This is a huge fall. I mean, if we thought he'd already fallen, then it just got a whole lot worse for the former Duke of York.
It couldn't have got any worse, and it could get a good deal worse still. I think it's important to stress that according to the Mail, the pressure on Andrew was, I read the headline as 9 forces probe files. Now what they've got him on, so to speak, the accusation is he's arrested on the charge of misconduct. That deals with his role as Special Envoy 2001 to 2011, and the fact that he is alleged to have sent confidential information, sensitive information, whether it's the Royal Bank of Scotland, whether it deals with possible investments in Helmand province, or deals with various countries that he visited in the in Southeast Asia and so on. Yeah. And they ended up in the hands of either Epstein or somebody close to him. And I mean, that is obviously totally unacceptable. But clearly this doesn't address the issue of trafficking and the accusations. We've seen embarrassing photographs. We've known that the photograph of 2001, which was published in 2011, of him with his arm around Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who's tragically committed suicide last year. We now know that that is genuine, and it's possible there's an exotic dancer apparently in the United States. There may be charges that she might bring. We don't know how many other victims might perhaps be involved in this. The whole point is that one of the problems the royal family has been so on the back foot is that you simply don't know what's coming. The Epstein files have gradually come out, and with them very embarrassing and indeed implicating material, including, of course, Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife, although not criminal for her.
One would have to... I mean, this is maybe more of a question for a lawyer, Richard, but we all have a view on this, that... I mean, Peter Mandelson, for example, who there's suspicions around a very similar area of misconduct in a public office. The police did visit him. They took some bits and pieces away, but they didn't arrest him. So the fact that they've taken this to arrest level might suggest they already have information to go on. They're not starting from scratch.
It certainly should, if you consider police did on 2 occasions investigate sexual abuse allegations, and they didn't pursue them. One must assume that they have sufficient, that they'll go on after the arrest, where there'll be charges and then possibly a trial. You can imagine what sort of cause célèbre that is going to be. I mean, the King has made it clear that the palace will cooperate with whatever the police want. However, this, of course, is going to be the issue that may define the coming weeks and months. Firstly, the intense pressure on the royal family. This is keep calm and carry on in circumstances which are very, very difficult. I mean, we've got the world's most high-profile royal family, and when things are good, that's wonderful. When things are bad, this is going to be really pressurised.
Yeah. What's the... we know his relationship with his late mother was very solid, but what about his relationship with his brother, the King? The King has made a statement saying the law must take its course, which some may interpret as a fairly... not callous to anybody else, but in terms of it being your brother. Now, you could counter that and say, well, what choice does the King have but to say that? What is their setup between the two of them? Are these loving siblings?
I mean, remember, there was quite a gap. He is a good deal younger than King Charles.
Yep.
And I don't think that they close. But also, there's no doubt the king, who of course is battling illness, he must realise the dangers. The fact that this happened. I mean, the last arrest of a member of the royal family in these sort of circumstances, you have to go back to the reign of Mary and Princess Elizabeth, later Elizabeth I. I mean, it's really, firstly, there's the sleazy side of it. Secondly, also, there is the fact that people believe a lot has been covered up. Then, of course, there are a variety of allegations. You mentioned Lord Mandelson. I mean, the appointment was a strange one, I thought. I can see why it was made, because it was thought that Mandelson would be able to handle the American president, but it was a month before it was made that it was announced that they were going to make the Epstein files public. Now, knowing that he was therefore linked with Epstein, it made no sense at all.
None at all. We're going to watch this one with interest and see how it pans out over the next few hours. Richard, thank you for your time as ever. Richard Fitzwilliams, royal commentator. Where does this story go? Remember, the arrest pertains solely to misconduct in a public office, and not for anything else. So you can read all the headlines and the salaciousness, and social media does its own thing and it reports some stuff and then just makes up loads of other elements as well, which rather sort of dilutes the authenticity of the real stuff, because you can't really decide what is real and what isn't. And that's the whole Epstein story right the way across. Whatever possessed, by the way, anyone to release just everything publicly, thinking that was a good, transparent thing to do, is not only a half-wit and an idiot, they're also somebody who hadn't really thought through what it means for victims, because this has done nothing for victims, releasing all of that. It has done everything to compound hyperbole, mischief, invention, fake news, you name it, it's all there. And then when you do see a story that's possibly true, you think, well, is that real, or is that somebody made that up? Back to your stories. David in Exeter on the right, the fight for the right. What are you thinking, David? Hi.
Hi. Well, there isn't really, is there? There's an easy litmus test with this, because the one thing that Advance Reform and Restore have all in common, along with UKIP, all the would-be right wing, is that none of them do defence and security. And it's an easy litmus test. So they're already united because none of them are doing it. They don't have, Reform is a particularly good one. They're being called out by Luke Pollard and Ben Wallace this week in the press with their pantomime shadow cabinet. They don't have a defence and security spokesperson. They've not had one since June the 18th to 24.
Is that because, I mean, some might say that's just because they're new and they haven't got round to the defence portfolio. And if you look at back in the day, people that have been appointed defence secretaries, you think, how did that ever happen? There was, I mean, do you remember under Labour, what was his name? George Robertson. Who was
now Lord Robertson? Yeah.
Who went on to be the head of? He went on to be the head of NATO somehow. He was a sort of slightly mad socialist at some point, and then became the defence secretary. So maybe is it too early to judge them on that?
No, I don't think so. I've personally lobbied directly to each of those party leaders: Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, and the UKIP outfit. And they just won't, can't, refusing to go anywhere near it. Now, that's in the context of war in Europe. So there's an alarm bell here with this. Surely everyone, hang on a minute, they want to be taken seriously. Where are you with this? And I don't accept there's a lot of excuses coming out of Reform currently about policy this, policy that, policy reshuffle management. Oh, well, yeah, so-and-so is going to do it. Load of nonsense. They don't want to do it and they won't do it. And there's a reason for that, and that's where the media's got to go. Why are you not doing it? Why? Well, can I just say something where the King's concerned? Just
briefly, if you can, David.
Yeah, sure. So listen, it's really straightforward, this. At the coronation, the King took a solemn oath to uphold the laws and customs and enactments agreed upon in Parliament. He is duty-bound by contract when he takes the crown to uphold the law.
Yeah. It's a fact, and it's a fair point as well. David, always great to chat. Thank you, David in Exeter. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 3:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. We've got a lot to get through. Sean Keach has joined us, which we're always delighted. He's Head of Science and Technology over there at The Sun. How are you, Sean?
Yeah, doing pretty good. I'm happy to be here.
Apart from you've got a wonky neck.
I've got a sore neck. I lay funny 2 nights ago, and it's still... so as long as you don't ask me to turn too sharply, I'm okay.
Isn't it weird? Like little things that we do every now and again, just silly stuff that doesn't go away, like dominates your day. You
Absolutely.
just slept in a weird position, probably for about 7 hours solid in one position.
But it makes me grateful for these swivel chairs, because now I can,
You can move. But if you moved your head like that, it would hurt. What have we got here? Let's start with some social media stuff. The social media giants given 48 hours to take down revenge porn or face hefty fines under new laws.
Yeah, this is about time, really. And revenge porn is a massive problem, and obviously it can be so damaging to people. So these new rules that mean that big social media companies like Facebook or X, they'll have 48 hours to take down revenge porn after being notified, or they'll face penalties. Now, that penalties might be up to 10% of their worldwide revenue, which is pretty significant when you think about some of these, billions and billions, and it's global revenue as well. So it's not just like they can sort of dodge it with sort of geographies, but it could also lead to them being banned from the UK if it feels like the sort of fines aren't significant enough. So it's a real crackdown.
How would they know it's revenge porn, though? If somebody has put something on social media, how would the social media...
It's very difficult for them to know, and I suspect that the thinking behind this is, well, they'll just hopefully take it down anyway, just to be safe. I suspect it's probably... I mean, I would hope it's not going to be used for any kind of censoring, because it would be censoring adult content specifically, and so someone would have to report it. I don't think you're going to see loads of false flags. I think it will probably mostly be used for people trying to get their own images off. But it's an amendment to the Crime and Policing Bill, so it could be as early as spring or summer this year, which is
But again, we've talked about this, Sean, before, and I still don't understand it. Why... particularly Twitter, which I think is sort of very central to a lot of this stuff. You could just put an algorithm in that says, right, there's literally no sexual content at all on this. You're not even going to see an ankle. There's going to be no violence.
Victorian mode.
Indeed, yes. You won't. You can opt for Victorian. Just toggle Victorian mode. You're not going to see violence. You're not going to see kids getting beaten up in the classroom. It'd be very easy just to do that. There's no, in the world of AI and algorithmic capability, of course they could do that, but they don't do that.
I suspect a lot of people do go to those websites for that kind of content.
Oh, they do.
Certainly the adult content. I mean, it's very rife on X, and I suspect a lot of the user base is going for that. And there are filters to try and toggle some of that away. But I mean, if you've been on X for any length of time, you will have certainly seen stuff that you didn't necessarily want to see.
Well, indeed, and also it's a nonsense. It's going to sound like I'm incriminating myself here. When people say, it only feeds you stuff because you've searched it out before, that's not entirely true. I was sitting on an aeroplane before takeoff, and I was looking at X, and I'm watching, I don't know, Nigel Farage or Kemi Badenoch or Keir Starmer or something on a video, and the video finished, and it immediately played a video of a woman in a supermarket taking her pants off, and I thought, right, if somebody's sitting right behind me now, because I'm not trying to hide the phone. They're gonna. So I'm straight away trying to get rid of it.
Swiping furiously.
And it was a kind of vaguely humorous. I think it's a woman that does this. She does it as a kind of thing. You don't actually see any nudity, but that's what she does. And then she leaves her underwear, in the cereal department or something for someone to find, presumably. Whatever.
That would have been a quite specific search as well. So it's probably unlikely that you would have been looking for that niche.
Underwear and Kellogg's. I never ever searched for that, so I don't know how it fed me this.
There's
particular
someone out
thing.
there. That's...
But my wider point is, even if you didn't ban, you might need to see violent content if you're reporting war, for example. So journalistically, you don't want to curtail that, and that's always what's bothered me from a journalistic point of view when they start saying, "Oh, we need to clamp down on this." And as a journalist, we should all be a bit suspicious when governments say we want to stop content. So I get that bit, but you could surely tweak it to such a level. I don't want to see a school kid getting beaten up by a load of other school kids.
And this is especially a problem for parents, because you can sort of make these more informed decisions as an adult. But when you think about putting, say, a child on YouTube, when they're looking on YouTube proper and searching for video, that's a very managed experience. But once you put them on YouTube Shorts and it's just a sort of algorithmic feed, you then lose control over what they're seeing. And I think adults certainly struggle with it. I think kids will really struggle with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Google are releasing a rival to the iPhone, and it's quite a lot cheaper.
They're very cheap, the Pixel 10a. So if people aren't familiar, Google obviously owns Android, which a lot of different phones run on, including Samsung phones, but Google also produces its own phones under the Pixel brand, and they're meant to be a rival to the iPhone. There's a new one that's come out, it's announced this week, it's coming out in early March, called the Pixel 10a, and it's £499, which is pretty cheap for a fairly high-end smartphone. And it's got two camera features that I want to talk about specifically. One of them is called Camera Coach. So if you're taking a photo, it will use AI to analyse the scene and then tell you if you're taking a rubbish photo or not. And it'll give you tips. It'll be like, zoom in, reframe it, take a step back. And then there's another feature called Auto Best Take, which I actually think is probably more useful. And so, sometimes when you're taking a group shot and then you look at it and someone's blinked and then another person's looking away a little bit, someone's head is blurred, it basically captures 150 frames in one go. And it takes the best bit of each frame so that you end up with a group shot where everyone is hopefully looking beautiful and their best. Because it's always that difficulty, I feel like, when you're in group shots, people will upload the one that they look best in, and then you're sort of in the corner looking like a bit of a weirdo with your eyes closed. So this should fix that.
I can never understand. So I was away with the family last few days, went to Bulgaria, and my kids were sledging down a sort of mountainside. There was a sled, and there were a couple of bars around the sledge area, so parents can sit in the bar, your kids sledging down. And my little boy, he takes his sledge and he's going further and further up this mountain. You can go as high as you want. It's the bottom of a black slope, actually, so it's like pretty severe. And I thought, I've got to get a picture of him. So I think, right, I've got an iPhone 17 Pro. It's got all the kit on there, and I know this because, Apple do what they do brilliantly. And I zoom in to take a picture, and I click away, and I looked at it. It looked like a picture of a mole on your skin, because it's just like a load of white, as in the snow, and a little black dot in the middle. And yet, when I've been to those, and you've been to those presentations, when you're taken through, and Apple, like any other company, what you don't realise always when you're in there is they've actually got the world's best photographer who's taken the picture. And he shows you a picture he took of the ankle of a locust taken from a mile away. And you think, wow, that's amazing. Look at that. It's crystal clear. Look at the little locust ankle. I didn't even know they had ankles. And I don't know how to achieve that stuff. So my partner, she seems to think that the zoom is more capable than on mobile phones in general. The zoom feature, which they focus on a lot, it's times 24, it's times 50, is actually too capable for the actual technology of a camera.
Zoom is very difficult on a smartphone purely because of the physical size of a smartphone. And so if you think about, for instance, sport games are a really good example of this. Whenever you see the press photographers next to a football field, they've always got really long lenses. It's because having those long lenses is better optical zoom. It's very hard to do that on a smartphone. They've tried different variations. They've tried sort of telescopic ones that pop out the back, you know, to mixed success. It's difficult to squeeze that hardware into a smartphone, and so really you are going to struggle to take pictures far away. There are sometimes some phone makers that try and get around it using AI, and so Google's Pixel 10 Pro phone has this feature where it uses AI to basically upscale the image that you've captured at 100 times zoom, which is, you know, brilliant. It looks great, but ultimately, if it's upscaling it with AI, is the picture that you're taking really real? And so
that's
sort of, it's this halfway house.
So the zoom is too capable, really.
Yeah,
and sometimes the actual capabilities.
Sometimes it will say that it's doing big zoom, but it's not actually doing big zoom. Sometimes it will say you've gone to 60 times zoom, but all it's actually doing is just blowing up the photo and then cropping closer in, and so you're not even actually getting
you're not actually
technically
zooming.
better quality.
And
so there are all these little workarounds, but it's.
I often talk to the, you know, I don't know if I'd want to have a Google phone. It's a bit like, you know, when you meet people who've still got a Hotmail address, it's got that thing to me. And it's like, you've got a Hotmail address?
People are very tribal about phones. I always say that probably...
I don't reply to anybody with a Hotmail.
The best advice is probably to just have the same device that the rest of your family has. And certainly from a parental controls perspective, that's good advice. But if you've got an iPhone, your kids have iPhones, it's much easier. You can share your subscriptions, you can manage each other's devices, and the same with Android. So I think just, you know, stick to what you know, because, and also it means that you'll know more about how their phones work.
But you can't transfer over, can you? That's the problem.
You can, increasingly you can, and there are now apps that let you do it from each of the, but I think it's more fast than it's worth.
Why could you not have two? So I've got my iPhone here. Why could I not have the Google phone and just have both on both? And they just, it's like, so one night I want to take me Google out, another night I want to take. Sounds good, doesn't it? I want to take me Apple out.
That is a life of luxury.
That is. It doesn't happen though, does it? There is a cheaper iPhone, having said that, coming out as well.
Yes, so last year, I don't know if you remember, but there was a new iPhone that came out called the iPhone 16e, which was the start of a sort of new budget range of iPhone, and it started at £599. Well, now we're on to the iPhone 17, so it's time again for the cheaper version of that. So Apple is hosting a special event, I think it's March 4th, it's in New York, London, Shanghai. It's going to be a big glitzy affair, and there should be an iPhone 17. There potentially might be some new cheap MacBooks, some new iPads as well, but I think it's probably the iPhone 17 in E that if it comes out, I think that'll be the headline, because it's, you know, it's quite cheap, probably £599, which is £200 less than the iPhone 17. Tends to have most of the same features. So I think that's probably going to be a good option. Usually you don't get a broad range of colours on these ones, which is probably one of the bigger shames, but you know, I think probably actually, as well as the iPhone, the other thing that might excite people is the cheaper MacBooks, because they might be doing the cheapest MacBook ever, potentially also around £599. Now, normally Apple laptops are very, very expensive. I usually consider them as a high-end thing. So I think
you always think over £1,000, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Microsoft and Google will probably be quite worried about this idea of
a Pro or a whole different
just
separate
regular MacBook. They're saying it might come in fun colours, and I think where the cost saving is going to come for them is that they're going to be putting a smartphone chip in it, because the smartphone processors are now very, very speedy. And so thinking maybe put that into a MacBook, nice and cheap, and you know, maybe you can get a MacBook for well under £1,000, which would be lovely. It's certainly for schools as well.
Can I ask you this? You've got a MacBook there sitting
It's
there.
very expensive.
I've got one sitting here as well. When you're writing a document, what do you use? Do you use Pages? Do you use Microsoft Word, which you can get for Apple? Or do you use Google's Office?
Almost all of my writing I do in the Notes app, whether it's for work or whether it's just personal life.
Notes?
I use Notes because it's very searchable. I can organise it. I can open it on all my devices because I use iPhone and iPad, and so I just keep it all together. And then obviously when we're publishing,
never expected that.
But I love Notes. I'm obsessed with Notes. I keep everything in my two favourite apps, which is going to sound really lame, are the Notes app and the Reminders app. Notes I love for all of my writing stuff. But reminders, me and my wife, we have a shared reminders list, and we have it prioritised by stuff we need to do. And so we have like a high priority tier list. You know, it might be something like, you know, do the washing, clean the shoes. I don't know, clean the shoes doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Clean the shoes.
Yes.
Oh, we do need to clean the wellies actually.
Do you clean
but
one
we'll have
each,
that ordered, and then we'll have our own shopping list as well that's synced. And it organises our entire lives, and it's so useful.
Wow.
And also a good tip: if you have an Apple Watch, put your shopping list on your Apple Watch. So then when you're walking around the supermarket, You can just see the list on your. You don't have to carry your phone constantly. Oh, have I got the beetroot?
Yeah, but you
have I
see,
got the cabbage?
I use. It's interesting. I use Amazon Alexa at home for the shopping.
Do you? That's interesting.
Because I can just bark it in the kitchen. Just add peanuts to the shopping
we do that
list.
with. I don't want to say a name because it'll trigger my laptop. But we use the Apple variant of Alexa.
Yes. And that goes to your list.
To the shared shopping list.
The shared shopping list. You see, everybody does
and
it.
it keeps our life. I think it's marital bliss is using reminders, shared reminders.
Reminders is one of my favourite apps. I use it literally all the time. I mean,
beautiful.
everything goes in there, and and I get it with notes, but I've never written anything extensive in notes.
I have thousands of notes.
Really?
Every time I come on this show, I open a new Ian note.
I'm in a note.
Some notes.
I love it. I'm in a Sean Keach note. Fine. Are you a fan of emojis, by the way? Do you emoji away when you
I am
send
a fan.
messages?
My old boss used to hate emojis, and he didn't believe in them, and he would always end his sentences in full stops, and it used to drive me crazy. So he just wasn't an emoji believer, but I'm a big emoji fan.
Yeah. I mean, Finn is a little bit thin on the ground with the emoji, I would say. And I don't know whether he's anti-emoji or whether he's... he uses the old ... bracket for a smiley face.
Oh, a fun tip. Well, I don't know, maybe semi-fun. If you go and add the Japanese keyboard on your iPhone, you know how you have your English keyboard, you can add the Japanese keyboard, and they have a special emoticon panel, and you get like thousands of these fun smileys, which are like the ones that you make by, doing asterisks and smiley. Thousands of them. So Finn, if you're listening, really,
Finn, that's what you need to do.
Can up your
Get a
emoji
Japanese
game.
keyboard. Well, the reason I mention that is because the Wildlife Trust and Centre Parks have apparently launched a petition to get a red squirrel emoji. Now, the red squirrel is a manky bit of kit, isn't it? This rabid little beast that runs around,
I'm a big red squirrel fan.
Well, of course you are.
I remember seeing them in Scotland once, and I was just amazed.
You've actually seen a red
It was mesmerising.
we only see
I've
grey
seen
ones, don't we?
black squirrels in New York Central Park. They have black squirrels, and also I saw a white squirrel somewhere. I can't remember where it was.
Far more
It was in Cambridge.
diverse, clearly.
I've seen loads of different squirrels. But red squirrels are beautiful. And they should get an emoji. I thought it was interesting with this story particularly that the emoji that people think is a squirrel is actually a chipmunk, a North American chipmunk.
Is that right?
And I've also seen a chipmunk, which is in America.
There you go. It's Wildlife Watch with Sean Keach.
But you've got justice for red squirrels, I think. And or just any squirrels. I think we certainly should have a squirrel
What's
emoji.
the deal? Does one attack the other? Is it the grey that attacks the red or the red that attacks the grey? I can't remember which.
I thought it was something like the grey carried a disease.
The grey squirrels killed all the red squirrels, didn't
it's an
they? We used to have
invasive
loads
species.
of red squirrels. You had
And
an
now the red
abundance
squirrels are
of them.
mostly up in Scotland and the
I
Highlands.
understand. Yeah, I think that's where they, but I see a lot of squirrels, but I only see those little grey things.
And they're very
just
captivating. Captivating
just rats, aren't they, really?
The pride of Britain.
Just because they've got a little brushy tail, we go, oh no, it's a lovely little squirrel. That thing would have your throat out.
And most people don't know they're endangered, which is very sad.
What, the grey squirrel?
The red squirrel.
Oh, the red. Yeah, well, the red squirrel. Like I said, I've never seen one.
The
of
grey
these
squirrels are, I can take a grey squirrel as well. They're fine. It's like parakeets. Parakeets are technically an invasive species, but it's lovely to see them flying around.
I don't mind seeing a parakeet. I quite like that. I wish we had a greater diversity of stuff in this country because we've got some. Didn't Attenborough try to do a BBC One programme of wildlife in London quite recently? And you kind of knew there was going to be lots of foxes and maybe the occasional badger on there, but you were never going to get an anaconda in Hackney, were you?
Foxes are lovely to look at, but we used to live near some, and the weird noises they make at night are just haunting.
Isn't that a mating thing?
Yes, it is. It's terrifying. I think that makes it more terrifying.
I think it's, without going too graphic, I think it's a clamping issue in the mating process, apparently.
That's lovely.
So the male is somewhat compromised. And, when I think about if that is what's happening there, that's exactly the noise I would make.
I was listening to a podcast today just on animal mating. The podcast wasn't on animal mating, but apparently dinosaurs, because they were so big, it made intercourse difficult. So they used to often then have to go into water so that you could have a little bit of a flotation aid.
Really?
So that they could sort of bonk in
I've never
water.
thought of two Tyrannosaurus rexes getting it on.
Well, no, you have to.
But
That's my gift to
I'm
you.
sure there is a special page for people who are into that. Listen, Sean, what a way to end a technology feature. Lovely to see you again, Sean. Sean Keach with us on the programme. Sean is Head of Science and Tech at The Sun. Check out all of his writings in The Sun, thesun.co.uk. There's loads in there. Stuff we've discussed here and much, much more as well. It's there on a regular and a daily basis. Thank you to Sean. Back with more from you coming next.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Julia.
joining
Nice
us.
to be back with you again.
Well, I mean, again, extraordinary circumstances. It's the former prince's 66th birthday. He's lost his HRH, he's lost his prince, he's lost his dukedom, lost all his titles, lost his big fancy house in Royal Lodge in Windsor, banished to the Sandringham estate. What was your first reaction when you heard that he had actually been arrested?
Well, at long last, is my reaction. I've been calling out for this, frankly, for nearly 6 years, ever since the allegation emerged.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Paul says, what happened, this is reference EV cars and cars in general we were talking about earlier, what happened to catalytic converters? Have they all been nicked? Yes. Apparently every one that ever existed, stolen. This from Rich on a similar question. All EVs are PIP or salary sacrifice. Used cars going up in value are still cheaper to run, even if you pay the ULEZ charge. Yeah, that's the thing. The used car market is still pretty buoyant. You can do quite well out of it. Let's go to Daniel in Shropshire. We asked that question, Dan, originally on who will win the fight on the right. What are your thoughts? Hi.
Hello. Well, it's not going to be the Tories. As Pete Barnes, I think Pete Barnes was wrong earlier when he said that the Tories weren't right-wing. They weren't. The Conservatives gave up on their namesake. They gave up on conservatism, and they took up the mantle of progressivism, which is peddled by... It is an ideology peddled by the uniparties as being some utopian centrist ideology. It isn't. It's a far-left grievance ideology rooted in Marxism and critical theory. And we've seen reform slowly drift towards that progressive ideology over the past few months. And people who are on the right wholeheartedly reject progressive ideology in all forms. It's like when Nigel went on TV a few days ago and said that being English is about how you feel. No, it isn't. English, Welsh, Scottish and Irish are recognised ethnic groups within our own legal system. You can't change your ethnicity any more than you can change your gender.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that sort of capitulation to the left that the right wholeheartedly reject.
But even within that sphere of thinking, there are divides, right? And I suppose the Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe divide is evidence of that.
Exactly. I mean, the whole reason why Restore is on the rise is, and we're going to see a lot more of this. I actually called back a few years ago when Matthew Goodwin released his report about white Britons becoming a minority by 2063. The more politicians refuse to talk or even have an open discussion about demographic change, which is a fundamental concern for millions, the more we are going to see more extreme elements of the right rise.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's always a hard one to talk about without somebody shouting you down as a mad old racist, you know, because you'll get the left go, what does it matter? Well, we wouldn't argue that if we were watching a documentary about a tribe on the other side of the world. We'd be endorsing their plight and their concerns. Interesting times. Listen, Daniel, thank you very much indeed for that. Kevin O'Sullivan's here. Kev, good afternoon.
Hello, Ian.
How's it going?
Not much going on today.
Pretty quiet.
Very quiet.
Day.